Good afternoon, members, officers and any members of the public in the public gallery or anybody on the live stream that's viewing the meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny Overview Committee. My name is Councillor Graham Cone and I'm chairing this meeting. My Vice Chair is Stephen Drew, sitting to my right. I will introduce other attendees when I invite them to speak. Those in the chamber are reminded that this meeting is being live streamed. The normal procedure at Scrutiny and Overview Committee meetings is to review and make recommendations to Cabinet by affirmation. Only those members of the committee present in the chamber will be able to move and second motions or affirm. However, members present virtually may speak in the debate. May I ask those who are joining us remotely to ensure their cameras and microphones remain off unless they are addressing the committee. For those of us present in the room, please ensure your microphone is close to you and speak clearly when addressing the room. Finally, a report of this meeting will be presented to the Cabinet at its meeting on the 5th of November. Neither the Vice Chair nor I will be able to attend this meeting, so is any other committee member able to be present at this meeting? Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. So thank you for that. So we'll now move on to the agenda. So first on the agenda is apologies for absence. Ian, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yeah, we have apologies from 4 committee members. They are Councillors Tom Bygott, Judith Rippeth, Joe Sales and Richard Stobart. And we've also had apologies from Peter Fane, Councillor Peter Fane, Chair of Council, who would have joined us but can't now. So.
Thank you for that. We'll then move on to declarations of interest. At this stage, I was just going to bring in John Murphy just to mention the dispensation that he's got for us because we're all ratepayers essentially. So, John Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to you and to everyone in the chamber. I'd just like to thank the Chair for being on the ball, looking ahead and spotting this and bringing it to my attention. With regard to the fact that I imagine a lot of you in the room are ratepayers to Anglia Water, and that will be a topic of conversation tonight. I've taken the I think the sensible view to issue a global dispensation so that all members can fully participate in this evening's meeting. That dispensation was circulated by my colleague Ian yesterday, and hopefully all members will have seen it. So, Chair, over to you.
Thanks very much. I'd just like to add it was Councillor Lehman that was actually on the ball and spotted that, I think, rather than myself. But are there any other declarations of interest at this point? Councillor Ellington.
Thank you. I'm a member of Swave CIDB.
Thanks very much. Councillor Bradnam.
And I'm a member of the Waterbeach Level Internal Drainage Board.
Thanks very much. Councillor Paul Bear Park. That's okay. Councillor Lehman.
I work for the Wildlife Trust.
Wildlife Trust. Paul. Councillor Paul Bear Park.
Yep, thank you. I'm also a member of the Waterbeach Level IDB.
Lovely. Thanks very much. If we've got no other items to declare, we will move on. Councillor Bradnam, yeah.
It just occurs to me I should also perhaps declare that in my role as County Councillor, I chair the Conservatives of the River Cam.
Thank you for that. If any other points of interest or declarations come up, feel free to raise them throughout the meeting. That's fine. So we'll move on to agenda item 3, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Could you all have a look through those? I know the minutes have been circulated, but are you all happy with those? Are there any items that you think should be amended or anything that needs changing on those? Councillor Bradnam?
Thought they looked fine.
Thank you for that. Okay, so are we all happy that they're an accurate representation of the meeting that was held?
Yep.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 4, which is public questions. Ian, do we have any public questions?
None today.
Thank you. So we will now move on to item 5, which is the sort of substantive item on the agenda. And this is from pages 9 to 12 in the agenda packs. So what I intend to do first is firstly, thank you for attending, all of the witnesses, but we'll call you one at a time to sort of a 5-minute introduction from Anglian Water, the Environment Agency, and then the officers, if that's okay. Then I'll move on to questions from the committee, and then we'll have a session, a period of time at the end where we discuss some recommendations that have potentially come out of the meeting. And you're welcome to stay for the whole meeting. It probably would be helpful, you know, in terms of the later discussions. So I was just going to draw members' attention to page 9, paragraph 4 of the agenda pack, just to sort of familiarise yourself again with the points on there, A to H, as to how we should sort of frame and form the questions, which I know you've all had. So I think we will start with a 5-minute sort of introduction. Just tell us a little bit about yourselves and your role essentially as Anglian Water.
Right, yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the committee for inviting us today. So my name's Grant Tufts. I work in our Public Affairs Department, Anglian Water. So one of my roles is to support our operational colleagues, and I'll introduce you to those in a minute, with public engagement, big things like scrutiny committees today, and political engagement, as well as regionally and also strategically in Westminster. So all things politics is in my world, but we do like to come to these scrutiny committees, and me and my colleagues have been to many across the region, which is a big region. So just a bit of background on Anglian Water itself. We're the biggest water company by geography in England and Wales, stretching up from the Humber down to North London, all of the counties on the east and all across to the west into parts of Oxfordshire. About 6 million customers. We have a particular sort of challenge around things like growth and climate change in our region, which we're very mindful of, and we're keen to address and combat as best we can. We employ around 6,000 people across the region, and we're looking to increase that quite a lot in the next 5 years. Bit more background on our future 5-year plan. So I know some of the questions later on will cover that, but we're looking to invest the record amount of money in the east of England in water, upwards of nearly £10 billion over the 5-year period from next year till 2030. Nearly half of that is environmental improvement investments as well. So we can again elaborate a bit more on that later on today. So yeah, thank you again for the invitation. I'll let the team introduce themselves, then we can crack on. So
Lovely.
Matt.
Feel free to do that now. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Matthew Moore. I'm Anglian Water Strategic Flood and Partnerships Manager. So I manage and lead in our strategic flood risk work. I also lead and own our strategic relationships with all our risk management authorities, so the Environment Agency, Cambridgeshire County Council, and indeed the District Council too. I do cover our entire patch and go to a fair few meetings like this, and always exploring innovative ways of dealing with flood risk and looking at ways to make lives better for the communities that we all serve.
Thanks very much.
Hello, I'm Lucy Hodd. I'm the Water Recycling Network Manager. I cover Cambridge and Huntington area, which is what includes this whole region. My team cover, or we look after mainly the sewer network. I have a team of 20 who are out in the operations world.
I'm Matt Reeves, manage a team that maintain and operate water recycling centres and pumping stations, and Letchworth area, which covers across to Foxton, Duxford, some bit of Cambridge, and a bit of Bedfordshire as well.
Perfect. So shall we move over to the Environment Agency team? Yeah, lovely.
Thank you. Sadia Moeed, I'm the Area Director for this part of the world from the Environment Agency. I'll briefly introduce our role and then hand over to Phil just to talk about the flood risk aspects of what we do. So we have a very broad remit, and today we will try and cover most topics, but just to manage expectations, we might need to take some things away. Our responsibilities include regulating major industry and waste, treatment of contaminated land, water quality and water resources, fisheries, inland river, estuary and harbour navigations, conservation ecology, and managing the risk of flooding from main rivers, reservoirs, estuaries and the sea. So quite a broad remit of environmental responsibilities. In terms of our priorities, we look to work with businesses and other organisations to manage the use of resources when it comes to the environment in our geography. We want to increase the resilience of people, property and businesses to the risks of flooding and coastal erosion, protect and improve land, water and biodiversity around our environmental protection roles, and improve the way we work as a regulator to protect people and the environment and support sustainable growth. In terms of sustainable growth, we have a role as a statutory consultee in the planning process, largely around flood risk and environmental impact, so things like contaminated land, waste, water quality. And then we have quite a broad-ranging remit in flood risk management specifically, which I'll hand over to Phil to talk to us about.
Thank you, Sadia. Hi everyone, my name is Phil Hume and I'm a flood and coastal risk manager within the Environment Agency. As Sadia mentioned, we have quite a big area, so we often refer to it as the west of East Anglia, but also the Great Ouse catchment. So that covers Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes, parts of Buckinghamshire, parts of West Northamptonshire, parts of Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. So it's quite a broad patch. In terms of flood risk, more generally, we have three core roles. The first is a strategic overview role of flooding, and that's of the management of all sources of flooding and coastal erosion. So what that role entails is setting direction for managing the risks through strategic plans, a key one being our national FCERM strategy. We provide evidence and advice to inform government policy and support others doing similar. We work collaboratively to support the development of risk management skills and capacity. And finally, as part of that role, we provide a framework to support local delivery. More locally, I guess you'd say, we have operational responsibility for managing the risk of flooding from main rivers, reservoirs, estuaries and the sea, as well as being a coastal erosion risk management authority. And then finally, and then I will stop talking, I promise, we are also a Category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004. So we work with all other responding agencies during emergencies such as flood events. Our key roles there are to warn and inform, to operate our own assets, clear blockages, etc., and work really closely with all other responding partners as part of a multi-agency response. I'll probably leave it there because that was probably enough.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, good evening everyone. So I'm Hilary Tandy and I'm the Flood Risk Manager at Cambridgeshire County Council. So as a county council, we're designated as a lead local flood authority and we were established in 2010 when that act came out. And some of the work that we're involved in is the preparation and maintenance of a local flood risk management strategy, which sets out the level of and the kind of risk across the county and how we're going to manage that risk from local sources. We maintain a register of important assets that are relevant to flood risk. We investigate any significant local flooding incidents. So you can imagine we've been a little bit busy of late, but that's the kind of investigative process that we get involved with afterwards. And then we publish the findings of those investigations. We also have powers under the Land Drainage Act to regulate some of the smaller watercourses. So the Environment Agency's already mentioned those main rivers, the bigger ones. The smaller watercourses or ditches, we've got the powers there to regulate activities on them. We're also a statutory consultee to the planning system for major developments, so anything of sort of 10 or more dwellings. And then we also have the power to implement schemes to try and reduce the risk of flooding. So we can look at anything that can be done from those smaller watercourses and surface water to reduce that risk. And we've also more recently, in the last couple of years, got a large piece of work around community flood action and working with communities to develop action groups so they can help manage their own risk of flooding. I brought along my colleague Brian. You can introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm Brian Heffernan, Principal Officer of Flood Risk, Cambridgeshire County Council as well. I get involved in the flood investigations and some enforcement work, and basically anything else in between with respect to the flood reports we receive. And as Hillary's indicated, we've been quite busy recently with respect to recent extreme rainfall events, extant ones that we're still investigating from the previous months notwithstanding.
Thank you. I'm Lee Hillam. I'm the Principal Operations Manager for Environment for South Cambridgeshire District Council. For the purposes of the services that I manage, I think the most appropriate one for this session is awarded watercourses. And South Cambridgeshire District Council have 275 kilometres of awarded watercourses for which we have a statutory duty to maintain. That includes the Webb's Hole pumping station, which is key to the Riveroos and drainage in that area. And I'm also the technical officer for awarded watercourses, so I deal with the day-to-day inquiries beyond the works team. So if there's an inquiry in general about a blockage or an issue with a watercourse, can include planning things as well, then I'm the officer for the council that deals with that.
Thanks very much. So as we've done the introductions, I'll move straight into questions. I was going to bring Councillor Paul Bearpark in first, just because I think it's, yeah, good question to start with. So Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. So my name is Paul Bearpark. I'm District Councillor for Milton and Waterbeach Ward, which is just north of Cambridge, for those of you that don't know. So we're often asked by residents to help us, to help them when they have an issue with flooding. It may be flooding in their garden or flooding of a road that they need to access. I've got a couple of live cases at the moment, and it is incredibly confusing and quite difficult to determine how to help them and who to go to help them with the flooding issue that they have. I was wondering if each of you could, each of the different organisations represented here could give us a kind of overview of where the responsibility lies when it comes to flooding and where it ends, and what the interfaces are between the different organisations, and how we may best engage with you to help our residents with flooding issues.
Okay, so we'll start with Anglian Water. Yeah. Fine. Please, yeah.
Thank you. I was just going to make a few points then to remember. Yeah, so from the County Council perspective, and I can speak, it's an incredibly confusing picture for who to contact relating to flood risk, and it says it all. I think there's already 4 organisations sat here today, and there's more involved than that. We've got, as mentioned as well, the internal drainage boards. Where we can get involved as a county council, one of the key things that I would highlight is the importance of reporting flooding to us. And we have got a tool on our website to do that for both property flooding, so if it's actually inside somebody's property, or if it's flooding of the gardens, outbuildings and roads. What we find is a lot of people don't report it to us, and therefore we don't always know about it. And we can only do something if we know. If we do get a report of flooding, if it's for internal property flooding, we've got an investigation protocol on our website which talks through what we will do. And that's, if certain thresholds are met, we're able to do a formal flood investigation, and that's where we would look at the cause of what's happened, and then whether all the risk management authorities have sort of done what they should have done in the process. If they haven't done, what could be done in the future to try and reduce the risk of it happening again. I'll be honest, if we receive reports of garden flooding and outbuilding flooding, we will always investigate them, but we would need to prioritise it if they all arrived at the same time as lots of property flooding as well. But if we do get reports like that and it's related to, for example, flooding from a nearby ditch, or if it's from blocked drains in the road, as a county council we would look into that to see what can be done. And this is where we've got powers under the Land Drainage Act that Brian can go out and we can require landowners to clear out watercourses to try and get that water away quicker. And then we can engage with colleagues in highways as well about having drains cleared out, if that will help in terms of draining water from the road. So I suppose from a county perspective, we're very much involved in the, once it's happened, we'll try and reduce the risk of it happening again, and we'll do that investigation process.
Thank you for that. Paul, did you want to come back on that at all?
No, thank you very much. You did mention landowners there, and it's good to hear that actually we can come to you if we think the blockage may be on private land that needs to be dealt with by the landowner. So thank you for that.
I'm just going to quickly come back on the first point that you raised, Hilary, about not many people reporting flooding instances. Is there anything we can do amongst residents to raise awareness around how to access, you know, the right tools to so things are reported and dealt with, you know, accordingly?
So I think one of the pieces of work we've done really successfully over the last couple of years that I mentioned is engaging with the communities, because they've had the ability to set up their community flood action groups. And where we've seen great success is areas such as Alconbury, which I know isn't in this district, but they've got together and they sort of know their areas, so they know where we've got vulnerable residents, they know what the triggers are on their watercourses so that there's going to be flooding. And also then they can act as a conduit to get kind of in contact with us as risk management authorities. So encouraging the establishment of those groups, which we can help with. You know, we've got people in the team there to help establish the flood groups, and I think the Environment Agency have as well, if you know we can work together on that aspect. But yeah, that reporting, and I think, you know, probably it's just getting the message out there. You know, any advice from you as well, you know, would be gratefully received on how you think we can best engage and encourage people to report the flooding.
Okay, so maybe starting to think about how to get that information to residents via parish councils, community organisations and so forth. Councillor Bradman.
No, sorry.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
No, don't stop you. You've still got two people on that side.
Oh,
you need
sorry.
to answer.
Yes, yeah.
So it'll be Councillor Bradman next.
Yeah, sorry. Please go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
So we do have a 24/7 contact centre that people can ring, but in flood events we get a lot of phone calls, as you can imagine, because after roads get flooded, the second victim of flood risk is often our foul sewer network that gets very easily inundated with surface water, especially when you've got rivers overtopping or problems with highways draining, and also people's roof water going incorrectly into the foul sewer system. So people will often ring us up and tell us that they can't flush their toilets, or they're having problems. We have scripting in our call centre that encourages people to the right agency that can help them, because with the greatest will in the world, if they call Anglian Water and we send someone out, it's going to be one of Lucy's engineers with a jetting van, and if a house is flooded, that's not a lot of help. So it's about making sure that people get the right support and the right help, and we're not wasting people's time sending people out who can't actually make a difference. You're not alone in this conversation. I was sat at the Lincolnshire County Council Scrutiny meeting on Monday having exactly the same conversation, and I believe they're speaking to their resilience forum, trying to make it simpler for people to report flooding, because we also share data, so ourselves and Cambridge County Council do share data. So if people ring us up and report flooding, we do pass that on to the County Council, as and when it's requested under our data sharing agreements under the Flood and Water Management Act. But Hilary's absolutely right, not enough people report flooding because for fear of many things. And I would also, whilst I've got the floor, absolutely agree with Hilary's point on flood action groups. They encourage personal resilience. They encourage communities to start taking a small element of responsibility for flooding, which we all have a duty to play as risk management authorities, elected members, and the public all have a role to play when it comes to flooding. Anglian Water has worked with Cambridge County Council on setting up some flood action groups as well, and also many others across the region as well. So if there's any way that we can support the addition of flood action groups in your communities, then please come and have a chat. We'd be more than happy to work with CAMS, whether it be funding or expertise or otherwise, to help get some of those off the ground.
jump in on this one, if that's all right. Okay, so I thought it may be first useful to set out our core role during an incident in terms of supporting communities, but then afterwards as well, as Cambridgeshire County Council have done. So the Environment Agency's core roles in flooding during an emergency situation are to warn and inform, and that's through our flood warning service, as well as some kind of bespoke relationships with partners as well. We have our operational teams on the ground operating assets, and what they will also do is respond to reports of blockages, which can often happen during a flood event. So if it is safe to do so, they will go out and remove those if they deem that the blockage will cause an imminent flood risk or make things worse. And then the other really big part of our role is to work with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough LRF to support the multi-agency response. So what you won't often see is, you won't see Environment Agency staff out on the ground helping communities. That's what the emergency services are for, but we will provide them with advice on where is best to go, where the high risk areas are, and that kind of thing to really guide that response. The contact centre that I mentioned is 24/7, so people can call in to report anything of concern, report flooding, report blockages, anything else that's of particular concern during an event. And then post-event, we will work really closely with Cambridgeshire County Council and other kind of risk management authorities through that investigation process and take forward any recommendations that sit within the Environment Agency's remit as well. If I may, I'd also like to include a third plug for flood action groups. I think it's one thing that we're starting to see more and more with flood events recently. So after the flood event in winter 2020, we saw a huge uptake of new flood action groups kind of getting established. After Storm Henk, very early in 2024, back in February, we started to get the first raft, I guess, of really positive feedback about the impact that they're having during flood events. As Hilary mentioned, it really kind of brings the community together. They know what to do, what action to take for themselves, rather than, the fear of sitting there not knowing who to call, what to do. Just today, we've actually met with our Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, and again, that feedback has come out loud and strong following the flooding that we've seen over the last few weeks. And we've just today had approval from that committee to fund an additional post to support more flood action groups get established. So I'm going to get the number completely wrong, but I think it's around 60 that we've already got across the Great Ouse catchment. And I think the more the better. I think it's those communities that don't have that community coordination that find flood events most distressing. And it really makes a difference when you've got that there. So I think that's been a really positive step just today.
Thanks very much. So I'll bring in other questions. Councillor Anna Bradman. Yeah.
All I wanted to say was at the point where Hilary Tandy was talking about reporting flooding, I just wanted to clarify, are you suggesting members of the public use report it, or how should they report?
So there are a couple of different ways. Yes, the website has the report it tool. At the moment, there's a split between reporting highway flooding and then reporting other flooding, which we appreciate is confusing for people. And we're working on a process at the moment to just have our flooding tool so that people can report it, and then it sort of divvies it up behind the scenes rather than expecting somebody to work out what source of flooding it is. So people can report it that way, or recently when we've had flooding in the last few weeks, some elected members have reported on behalf of their residents and used that tool, or just emailed us directly. And we've got a team email address, which is just floodandwater@cambridgeshire.gov.uk, and any reports that we receive in that way will be treated the same.
Thanks very much. Councillor Sue Ellington.
Thank you. I realise to a certain extent Anglia Water are somewhat between the devil and the deep blue sea, quite literally. But we understand from several discussions with the Environment Agency that Anglia Water are currently exceeding their permit outfalls from Utton's Grove wastewater treatment works. And obviously it's an offence to exceed this permit, but that any new application to increase the numbers would need to have an assessment done, a flood risk assessment done on the drains, the main Swavesey drain. And I just was hoping that I might encourage you to do that more urgently, given that we are seeing an increase in outflow requests for the extensions to Camborne, Bourne Airfield, and Uttonstrove is really a concern, and the water flowing onto the river is obviously a concern to Swavesey.
Did Anglian Water want to take that first, and then, yeah?
Hi, so yeah, you're correct that Camborne does pump to Uttonstrove, that's right. Swavesey then pumps to over, so they're like separate systems. That's all that I can comment on at the moment. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think we've just got some notes about the Uttonstrove Centre won't be impacted by Swavesey. They're separate systems, as Lucy said. So I think, although the permits are being exceeded, I think we've got plans and investment to deal with that, but new growth shouldn't make it worse. So, but we'll follow up on that.
There's a need for a risk assessment on the Uttonstrove Swavesey drain because that's an open drain, and all the water that goes down it has to be pumped over the bank into the river. So at some point, given the amount of new housing that's going on in this area of Camborne and Bourne, it really is a concern to Swavesey residents.
So growth since 2010 has been treated very differently to growth traditionally, where developers are now discouraged from connecting surface water into a foul system, which is what causes the main headache when it comes to flooding. So we would only expect to see foul water entering that sewer network, and surface water will be dealt with elsewhere. So therefore, whilst there is substantial growth planned, it doesn't have, as Grant says, as much of an impact as you might think it would have. Although, as Grant says, we have got investment plans to deal with that, as has been rightly said. What I would also say is that the government had plans to implement Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act, but would make big changes to this side of legislation. And we're lobbying as hard as we can as a water company to see that part of the Flood and Water Management Act reenacted, which would remove the developer's automatic right to connect and make it dependent on the approval from a SUDS approval body, which ultimately is likely to be the county council. So there is legislation to make this world a little bit easier and give us a little bit more control on growth, but we are in the hands of government, unfortunately, to reenact it at the moment.
Just to add to Matt's point, we're also, unlike the other people in the room, we're not statutory consultees for planning applications, so we've got no right to oppose growth and development. So we rely a lot on our planning team to ask for conditions to be applied through local planning authorities. Whether they do or not is up to them, but we haven't got that power as such as the EA or the Cambridgeshire County Council. So that's something, again, we're working on through our lobbying roles to try and get that sorted.
I'll just bring the Environment Agency.
Sure. I just thought it might be useful to offer some reassurance to Councillor Ellington. So we've been in conversations with Anglian Water over the last, I think, 2 years around the concern around the Swavesey Drain and Uttonstrove Recycling Centre. I think there's an acceptance that the permit will need to be revised and some work undertaken on that water recycling centre to accommodate all the growth that is planned and to go that way. We've yet to see permit applications, but when they do come in, there will be a requirement to address the flood risk concern, and that will be publicly consulted on. So there will be an opportunity for local residents to, see whatever plans are developed and comment on those if they wish to.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that at all? No, that's fine. Councillor Bradnam. Yeah.
Thank you. And while Anglian Water's talking about surface water drainage, I wanted to ask, what are Anglian Water doing to encourage households to ensure their surface water drainage from their roofs and gutters is not going into the foul sewer? I know there's some obviously older houses in our villages where the foul and surface water sewer is the same. But what are you doing to try and encourage residents to make sure that their rainwater doesn't go into the foul water network?
So not a lot of people realise this, but under the Water Industry Act, it's actually illegal to have surface water into a foul or foul into a surface water. It's not part of the Act that we usually prosecute under, because as you can imagine, it wouldn't go down particularly well with the communities that we supply services to. We are starting, and it's not just Anglian Water as an industry, in looking at things like retrofitting sustainable drainage solutions, supplying planters and water butts to people to encourage them to make that change. But we've got very little on our side in terms of support, in terms of the regulation, but we are in a number of areas working on trials to look at how effective, if we supply a community with rainwater planters or water butts, how much does that actually remove from the system? Is it worth the investment that's applied into it? Who looks at maintenance of these assets and so on and so forth? Because these units take up space, not everyone wants a planter or a water butt in their garden, and it brings all sorts of debates up, as I said, about ownership, maintenance, replacement after the lifespan of the asset, etc. What I would like to do, though, if it's okay, if there's a specific example that we might be able to work on in South Cambs, let's have a chat and see if we can get something arranged and see if we can get one of our trial areas for this coming financial year in South Cambs, and see if we can get some water butts or a planter supplied to a community area.
In the past, people would have had soakaways, and I think a lot of people buying an old house don't realise what the soakaway's for, aren't aware of what the function of it is, and so a lot of them have been filled in over the years. And I just think we ought to be somehow, and I know, in fact, I thought you were going to say, we offer a reduction on your water bill if you can demonstrate that the surface water drainage doesn't go into the foul water. So I'm just thinking, you could do something a bit more there to try and remind people that what soakaways are for, and also encourage them by incentive.
Angling water. There is a reduction in your bill, as you know. I think Councillor Rabden, that is available on application, so we don't apply it we do apply it retrospectively, but we can't assume that everybody's not got that connection. So it's a case of taking it off rather than people are defaulted onto that payment. It's not a lot, but you do get some back. The other thing you can do, and I think as Matt mentioned earlier, is getting the education through those flood groups. Everyone's got a personal responsibility to protect their homes from flooding, and if that means that they can look at disconnecting their downpipes and putting them into a soakaway they didn't know they had, then so be it. We've had some really good examples of communities where they've realised, some individual property owners have gone home and actually managed to replumb their roof water and saved some flooding. So it is all about that personal responsibility as well as sort of big corporate stuff. So every drop does count in that sense. So the Flood Action Group opportunity is there, and we will happily help support and set those up. And that's part of the battle, is getting better education, get people understand what their roles are and what they can do.
Please, yeah.
The other thing that's really important is educating the next generation, and both ourselves and Cambridge County Council have done in the wider Cambridgeshire area substance school programmes. So that's where led by CAMS, but with some financial support from Anglian Water, we'll go in and we'll retrofit sustainable drainage solutions into schools. Now that benefits the school, but what it does is it starts a conversation. It starts a conversation with the next generation of homeowners to start understanding the sustainability argument. If we can start talking about dealing with surface water sustainably, but then start thinking about water saving and power, energy saving, and all the other sustainability messages that come from it. So we are tackling this from a multi-pronged approach. But as Grant says, this is something we all have responsibility to raise awareness of. And if there are specific examples, or you've got any great ideas where we can help and support with those and engage in those communities to get that message across sooner or more urgently than we are already doing, then let's have a chat and see if we can make that work.
Something that I completely agree. I think I go to quite a lot of parish council meetings, and it's something that people often talk about, how can they encourage the community. Something that I've asked for is for some type of misconnection leaflet, or something to be able to be available on the website to make it clear exactly what, like you just said, about what things are for, how can people get involved, what arts water saving may be directed to certain places. So it's something that is in the works at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Bradman, do you want to come back on that at all? No? Thank you. Okay, so we've got Councillor Peter Sanford, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if colleagues from Anglian Water would like to comment on the condition of their infrastructure. It seems when I look at a map of roadworks in Cambridgeshire, the vast majority of them are either water main repairs or sewer repairs. Indeed, I read today that two schools in, I believe it was Witchford, had to close because of burst water mains that were supplying their premises or no longer supplying their premises with water. Comments, please.
Anglian Water.
Yeah, so I saw that this morning as well. Councillor Sanford, yeah, it was unfortunate, and I think the schools were back on by lunchtime, but obviously too late for the children to get back for the rest of the day, so it was a shame. But so Anglian Water's network is vast. You know, we're talking 37,000 kilometres of water mains and double that for sewers, and a lot of it is ageing. Looking at the history of investment, we've tried to invest as best we can since privatisation back in the late 80s. Our regulator, Ofwat, has limited investment through the price increases we are allowed to make. The £10 billion investment on our infrastructure that we're proposing for the next 5 years, against the previous 30 years of 17 billion over that period, it shows you what the uplift in investment is going to be. So unfortunately, we do have ageing infrastructure. I mean, it has lasted a long time. Some of this stuff is Victorian, as you can imagine. New infrastructure is a bit better, obviously, but we've got a finite pot of money. Your customer bills pay for it, so we target those investments where we get the best return and where the need is most. We wish we could spend more, but obviously there's a limit on how much we can invest based on bill increases and investment we've got available. But yeah, I mean, we work closely with Cambridgeshire Highways on things like road closures and try to work with other utilities to lessen the impact. And our teams work hard. Lucy's teams are out there all the time and maintaining our assets as best we can. We've also just last year started to invest in about another 20,000 monitors on our sewers, which basically tells us before they go wrong, whether they're likely to go wrong. So that preventative assessment means that we can get to things and maintain them before they cause a disruption or burst or an issue. So again, that's one of our sort of the technology moving on gives us that insight ahead of things going wrong. So hopefully we should see reduction in that disruption over time. But yeah, take your point. You know, it's not what we want to be, but we're working hard to reduce that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go out on a wing and say I think most of our residents would prefer to pay a little bit extra on their bill if it helps you update your infrastructure in a more timely manner. I'm not sure how we can support you in that, but please do come back to us if necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, I could add to that. So yeah, I mean, that £10 billion, if it's approved by our regulator, which we'll find out at the end of December, will mean that bills will go up, which is what we need to happen. So at the way we're modelled and financially in the water industry is that our owners invest money up front. You know, that £10 million is all put forward by our investors, and then customers pay that back over the life cycle of those assets that we build or we maintain over that 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years or so. So the average water bill today is about £1.45 a day, but for an average family household. For all of your water, all of your wastewater, which isn't a great amount compared to other utility bills. By the end of 2030, if the plans are approved, it might be £1.57. So not a massive increase, talking a few pence, but yeah, enough to make that £10 billion worth investing in. So yes, there will be some news on bill increases in the new year ahead of our final determination that will kick in from next April, and then you'll see that investment brought forward, hopefully in some of that in your communities. So.
Thank you. Councillor Libby Earl, please. Yeah.
I was going to follow on from Councillor Peter Sanford's question, because we're talking about old infrastructure here, and it's not a new problem. Obviously, it's been going on for some time. Anglian Water is a private company. You have shareholders. And I'm wondering what the processes have been and are now for balancing the interests of both your stakeholders, your shareholders, and members of the public who rely on the services to make sure that firstly, the old infrastructure is dealt with, and secondly, that you are actually putting in new infrastructure, modern infrastructure, which will cope with increased development and also the effects of climate change, because we are going to see increased rainfall. And helpful though it is to talk to members of the public about water butts, not everyone can actually install a water butt or a soakaway in their property and are experiencing problems with flooding from surface water.
Anglian Water.
Yeah, so your first point about our investors. So yeah, our investors are basically in it for the long haul. We've got established owners in Anglian Water, mainly pension funds, both the UK and foreign pension funds. They've been with us for many, many years. They, as any investor would, they expect a return on their investment, which is what you would expect. But to be fair, they've not always taken dividends. They have taken, I think, £96 million in the last 5 years, which is way less than they could have taken. Those investors can basically get this more return if they invested in an ISA in the high street. So they're not in it for the money, they're in it for the stability of what the water company offers them, for their shareholders. They invest a lot more money as one top of that investment that they get back from dividends. For instance, just last year or this year, they put £100 million extra direct funding into our business to deal with storm overflows. They've also put in 1.2 billion to look at environmental improvements the last 5 years as well, on top of their normal investment. So our shareholders are I think, a fair and equitable part of our operating model. They understand very much how we need to invest more in the community and keep bills as manageable as we can. So that's why they invest what they do. In terms of future growth and future awareness of climate change, we have various plans and programs in place in the company. We have a long-term delivery strategy which looks 25 years ahead. And we have some expert modelers that can help us do predictions on climate change. We've got a climate change adaptation report, which again makes sure that our assets are protected for increased flood risk and drought and all the other things that get thrown at us. As I said at the start, we're particularly prone to climate change in East Anglia and this region. We suffer from drought and floods, ironically, very flat, low-lying. And our assets are being adapted and built to withstand future climate change challenges. Absolutely, that is the case.
Councillor Earl.
There is an argument that water and sewage management is a key aspect of public health. Coming from a public health background myself, I would push that. Do you not think there's a case for poor water companies to go back into public ownership so that this actually becomes a public issue rather than shareholder issue?
Anglian Water.
Yeah, there is an argument for that. And obviously the water industry was privatised in 1989 by the then Conservative government who felt they probably couldn't afford to put the investment needed back then into the industry after years and years of neglect. The model that we've got now, as I said a minute ago, is basically based on investors that put the money up front, and then that money is then paid back by bills over the longer period of time, managed by a regulator. It's a model that we've had for 30-odd years. I think it works in this country. I think there's an argument if it was renationalised, then all taxpayers would have to pay more money through their tax system to invest in the water companies and get their investment put forward. We're talking hundreds of billions of pounds of investment in the next 5 years across all the water industry. When the government's got decisions to make over hospitals, NHS, education, defence, everything else, where would water sit in that list of things to invest in? I think the model works. It's a sort of fundamental sort of ideological discussion, I suppose. But that's what we've got, and that's how we operate. And I think we do care a lot about the communities we serve. In fact, we're one of the only water companies that have got a purpose in our. We changed our what's it called? Our Articles of Association as a company to make sure that we serve our communities for both environmentally protection and through sustainable growth. So our board and our directors have direct responsibility to deliver on those outcomes. We're not a bottom line company at all. We're very much, it says in our logo, we love every drop, and it's something that's dear to all of us here today and all of our other colleagues, and also our shareholders believe in that, which is why they've been with us for so long. So I think that's the model we've got. You can argue either way, but I think it does work.
Yeah, please come in.
There are examples across the UK. So Welsh Water is a not-for-profit private company, and Scottish Water is nationalised. So both those water companies have very, very similar challenges to Anglian Water and indeed the rest of the UK, the rest of the water industry in England and Wales. So there are examples of where it's already nationalised. There's examples of where you've got a not-for-profit company running it, and you know, I have many conversations with Scottish Water and Welsh Water, and the grass is not always greener on the other side. So as Grant says, there's an argument for, there's an argument against. But I would ask people who push for nationalisation to go and speak to Scottish Water, to go and speak to Welsh Water, and understand the challenges they face as a essentially owned by the government. It brings back a whole set of different challenges when it comes to investment.
Okay, so Councillor Earl, did you want to come back on that at all?
No, thank you.
Thank you. So we've got Councillor Helen Leeming next.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a question, please. And I also wondered whether Pippa would be able to put up the storm drain map, please. I want to ask about storm drains. It's a series of questions about this, actually. So perhaps if we could just have a look at the map, that would be helpful.
We'll just wait for that to come on screen.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Great. So when I was sort of preparing for this meeting, I found this map which discloses where all the storm drains in our area are. At the moment, just so that people would understand what it meant, each one of these blue spots is a storm drain. If there's a sort of activity in that storm drain, it goes purple. If it's triggered, it shows it's active. At the moment, in our area, there aren't any in South Cambridgeshire. But if we look at, say, this one over here, where is that? I don't know. It's in Bedfordshire. That one's active at the moment. And it shows you how, sorry, I forgot what it is. It's the Odell, yes. So if you highlight over that, it shows you that it's active, and it tells you how long it's been active for. So it's quite a useful piece of information for the public to be able to see what's happening with storm drains in their area. So when I had a look at this map, the first time I came across it was actually about a week ago when we had, all the storm drains were active because there was so much flooding. There were many of these storm drains were active in our area. If we have a look at the moment, if you go back to Hardwick, for instance, you could see the last time that was triggered. So it's just to the east of Camborne. That's it. So yeah, so that went off at the start of this month, and it was running for 21 hours. If we move down to Barton, you can see that one's been active recently. Haslingfield is an area that I wanted to talk to you about specifically. When I look on your frequently asked questions on your website, you talk about these drains being active in exceptional weather. You said that last year in 2023, 70% of our spills were in Q4 alone. It's a wet year in 2023. My first question is, what was 2023 exceptional, or are we going to see similar amounts of flooding in 2024? That's my first question.
Anglian Water.
So I'll let Hilary take the exceptional weather answer, if that's okay, because I believe it was absolutely exceptional, but I'll let Hilary take that in a second. So this map, it shows our combined storm overflows. So I think it's important we get the wording right, because the word storm drain can be quite misleading. So these are where we've got discharges into watercourses that will surcharge when our foul sewer systems are pushing forward a certain amount of flow, and the Environment Agency permit them to spill to prevent flooding to properties. They are there as a pressure release valve to protect properties. They're not there to purposely cause damage. They're not there to cause an impact and frustrate people and frustrate politicians. They are there simply to protect homes. But if we didn't have these storm overflows, many more homes would suffer with flooding. So it's about trying to find a middle ground. We don't like storm overflows as much as you. I think I speak for all of us where we'd much rather they didn't exist. They are a necessary evil at the moment. As Grant says, billions going into our business plan over the next 5 years, and the majority of that is focusing on storm overflow reduction. So there is a real drive for it in the business, but it's important to understand they are consented. We are allowed to do it under the consents and permits that the Environment Agency give us in certain conditions. There are times when we see blockages due to unflushables and things like that, where we do see unconsented spills. And those are the sorts of spills that that Anglian Water are prosecuted for. There are many examples where the Environment Agency have taken us to court. We've been fined substantial figures for polluting the environment. But in wet weather, they are a necessary evil. They are permitted to spill, and they do protect many homes. What I would say is the requirement to actually publicly report this data. Anglian Water was very early to deliver on that, but the deadline was much before that. The way they work is on the flap there's a sensor, and the sensor tries to read if a flap is elevated or not. So just because it says it's spilling, it's the best we've got at the moment on the amount we've got, but just because it says it's spilling, it doesn't physically mean there's flow coming out. And that's why we see things like false positives, because the flap sometimes gets stuck open, and may have to be physically greased up and released back again. It's not like there's a flow meter on there that's measuring the flow going out, and there's thousands of litres pouring out when these are activated. So we do sometimes see false positives, but for the purposes of, for the sake of this conversation, it's reasonable to assume that in the wet weather we've seen, there were spills occurring, and most spills were there to protect properties from being flooded.
Should there be a flow meter, do you think, Vic, so you could ascertain that?
Yeah, we're looking at installing where we can, but under the regulations, we're only permitted to put these what they call event duration monitors on. So basically, it tells you how long and when they spill. So just to follow up on Matt's point. So on the first time you log into this screen, there's a box that pops up and says exactly what Matt says, that these are activations, not necessarily spills. So there's a bit of a caveat there just to let people know. The data itself has to be formally validated and submitted to the Environment Agency, which is done on an annual basis. So, which is why you have to wait sort of a year until you look back and see actually what was it spilling. Now, clearly, people can see them spilling. If there is a spill, as Matt says, in wet conditions, then that's a valid spill. But just just be mindful that not all of these are actual spills. They're just activations of that alarm on that telemetry system. And we deploy technicians to check, and then that's when the validation is done, and then that's all reported back and double checked, triple checked. And then it goes to the EA, and then they publish it every year. I think it's in March time for the previous year, so you can see the previous year's spill rates. And we're monitored and measured against those figures. And out of the 1,500 or so storm overflows we've got in Anglian Water's region, as Matt says, we're working very hard to try and get those down as best we can and remove them from the system. It's not that easy when you've got Victorian infrastructure and major villages that are all plumbed into them. So we'll get there, but that's why the billions of pounds investment is going to help us do that.
I'll bring you in, Lucy, and then I'll come back to you, Helen. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to add, so when any of these activate, they're obviously done on a priority basis. My team do attend the alarm. They will sample the watercourse as well, and do a lot of environmental impact assessment. They will carry kits to do that. That can help. That is part of what helps to, as Grant said, about looking at like the validation of the data. That is something that is we try our best to go out to.
Councillor Lehman.
A number of questions to follow up from that. How do you prioritise which ones to go to first?
So all of the work in Anglian Water is centralised in our centre in Lincolnshire. It's all done on a priority basis. So when alarms get put in, they get input in with a code, depending on like the seriousness of the potential impact, the size of the main, the location that it's at. It determines, it's all built in basically. My team get given their work scheduled for the day. Anything that comes in as a pollution or as a priority alarm automatically gets prioritised and goes down as soon as technicians are able to attend. So that's how it's sort of operated, if that answers your question.
Councillor Lehman.
So is it to do with the volume of water? Although you said you can't measure that. So is it to do with the site, the sensitivity of the place where the storm drain is? Is it to do with how close it is to people? Is it to do with whether it's flooding into a triple SI?
Sorry, just to be clear, in terms of which ones of these we attend,
Yeah.
no, it's not necessarily prioritised based on that. Sorry, I was talking about compared to other work. Obviously, my team also attend to help like anything to do with like when there's blockages in the system, any customer jobs. My team are customer facing, so people report issues and they attend to obviously like help with that. Anything over and above is whether we just have capacity to be able to attend. We try our best to attend. That's the whole point. Like, we are here to want to protect the environment. That's what we're here to do.
Councillor Lehman.
So these things could be active but not attended because other things have taken priority ahead. Thank you for confirming that.
That's correct.
I'm just going to follow on to the point that was made about the information that's collated at the end of the year. So I had a look on the website and I've seen what's been collated from the previous year. I don't know whether it's possible just to share the table. So we filtered the data. So that there's a very large report. Obviously, you have a huge catchment, and there's many of these storm overflows all around the region. But we filtered the ones which are up here. These are South Cambridgeshire's rivers. And actually the ones in blue, this is Cambridge City, so we've included those within this because it's part of our sort of river network. And the ones that are shaded in the sort of amber colour, those are ones which are just outside the boundaries of South Cambridgeshire, but they're obviously involved in our water system too. So yes, we've had a look at what's been happening in South Cambridgeshire with these storm overflows. I understand that you're caveating whether if these things are sort of genuine alarms, but given that that's all we have to go on, I think we just have to take it that this is a recording of action in the area. I wanted to particularly talk to you, please, about what's happening in Hardwick and what's happening in Haslingfield, because those two sites in particular, this doesn't look like exceptional activity. It looks like it's pretty constant. So just so it's clear, we have just about 2,900 hours of activity in Haslingfield, 2,000, I think it's 600 hours, yes, in Hardwick. So it's about a third of the year that thing's active. Could you please explain what's happening in Haslingfield?
Yeah, so actually this is something that I'm actually looking at the moment for Haslingfield. So obviously after all the wet weather over the last kind of like, wettest year on record, is it? We've had a lot of problems with groundwater infiltration, particularly to the south of Cambridgeshire. We've had a lot of issues with supporting some of areas tankering until June actually this year in terms of for environmental impact reasons. Haslingfield is on my radar in terms of having suffered because of infiltration. It's been promoted for infiltration surveying in order to help with the amount that it goes to the pumping station and potentially and then onto the works. This is something that comes out of my budget that is not been accounted for. So I can't give you a time frame. All I can say is that it's been put as the top priority because of the pollution risk and the amount. So it's definitely something that's on the radar in terms of that. The reason I talk about that is because when you have a lot of infiltration into a system, that obviously means water is getting into the foul system when it shouldn't be there. If water's getting into the foul system when it couldn't be there, that means that the storm overflows are more likely to alarm for their duration, which goes back to the whole point about having misconnections to properties and anything to do with that. So it's something that would definitely want to look at.
So
just to confirm, these are the validated figures. So they're not. You're right. These are the ones that have been submitted and checked. So they're not. These are genuine hours.
These are genuine figures.
Yep,
These are 2003 figures they've published. Yeah.
I was going to say that Lucy mentions groundwater, and I think it's really, we need to have a chat about that, because groundwater now presents, in my opinion, our single biggest risk of flooding in East Anglia. What we see when Lucy talks about groundwater flooding is hard to visualise what's actually happening under the ground, but the groundwater level gets so high that where our foul sewer is, it's groundwater surrounding it. Anyone who's been an engineer or knows engineering will know that a gravity system is not a sealed system. It's got collars on the pipes that allow it to flex and move in the ground to stop things like collapses and bursts. And it allows groundwater through those very, very small holes into the system. And it causes absolute mayhem, to be honest with you. Foul sewers are sized and designed to take foul-only flows. When you introduce surface water into it, as we spoke about earlier, with not just downpipes, but we've found examples of wrongly connected road gullies and all sorts of stuff, that causes a problem. But when you add groundwater into that, and these hit you all at the same time, when we see groundwater ingress, it's when we're getting those really big storm events, Storm Babette, Storm Henk. So groundwater is causing a real problem, and as Lucy said, those two areas are absolutely potent for groundwater infiltration. So those figures don't surprise me. What I would caveat that with, though, is if we didn't have those storm overflows, the impact on people's properties would be substantial. So in a way, those figures don't make for good reading, not at all. But actually, if we didn't have those spills, given the network at the moment, there would be mass flooding to people's properties. So as I said, go back to my earlier point, they are a necessary evil at the moment until that money investment comes around, as Grant says, is fully planned in for AMP8 and moving into AMP9, so the next 10 years. And it will make a difference. But I agree with you, figures don't make for good reading, but as a caveat, the impact on properties would be substantial if that didn't exist.
Thank you. So as I understand it from looking at your website and how this systems works, it's about 5% of this is sewage, isn't it, once it's diluted with the groundwater. And that's pretty unpleasant, actually, thinking that this is the River Ree that runs up past Grantchester up into Cambridge, and it's a precious stream. I wanted to talk to you about the types of work that you would be doing to mitigate this, and I'm wondering if it is something where you would be working with other partners to design subsystems or to divert the water, or what can you do to reduce this infiltration of the groundwater into the foul system?
And the water.
So there's plenty of engineering solutions that exist. None of them are particularly cheap. The simplest way of dealing with groundwater is relining the sewer. And what that does is it basically seals the system and stops groundwater coming in. That might work, but that doesn't remove the groundwater flood risk. And that's why working together with our key partners is so important, because all that does is removes Anglian Water from a debate. It removes us from saying, well, our system's fine, over to you guys. And that's not necessarily the right way of dealing with groundwater. If it's not getting it, so you could look at the fact that our sewers are actually acting a bit like a French drain at the moment. In those areas, the groundwater's coming in, it's finding its way into our sewer, yet it's getting into those water courses. It's not a pleasant thing to think about. But if it wasn't getting into our foul sewers, that groundwater would exhibit itself elsewhere, potentially through blowholes in people's gardens, on the street, on the road, So I would caveat that we can reline, and part of the infiltration that Lucy spoke about would involve relining certain aspects of the worst parts of it. But that doesn't resolve the problem. And we've got to think strategically to think, how can we all work together, and that's all agencies, to actually deal with groundwater in a more sustainable way. Because something I always say about is we'll be talking about drought in the summer and we're talking about flooding in the winter. When we talk about water management, we're talking about both extremes. Until we actually start talking about drought and flooding in the same sentence and look at how we manage water more responsibly as a society, we're never going to get it right. So we've all got a part to play in this, but I would argue that we need to get better at keeping hold of that water when we've got it, to use it when there's not enough. And as an industry, we've still got quite a long way to go in that journey.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. Actually, Chair, I was going to ask whether any of the other partners wanted to add any suggestions to what could be done to help reduce this runoff in these areas in particular, and in general in the area.
Lovely. Would anyone else like to comment on that? Please. Yeah.
I think the groundwater, completely agree with what Matt's saying about the groundwater issue. And actually, nationally, it's something that hasn't really reared its head very often, but is doing so more often now. And I think there's something we're keeping a keen eye on. Is there's a project running in, I think it's Buckinghamshire, who've got some funding available via the Environment Agency on one of a longer term, I think it's a 5-year project looking at the impacts of groundwater, how it could be managed, and then methods either for warning about groundwater flooding, but also actually dealing with it. So we're keeping a close eye on that and working with partners wherever we can to input into it. But you also mentioned about partnership schemes, and there are a couple that we've worked on with Anglian Water to try and get that water out of the sewer. One of them is in March in Fenland, but there is also one of the Suds in Schools projects that Matt mentioned in Willingham, which has been designed up, it's just not yet been implemented. And that's ways of trying to capture that roof water and actually deal with it on the site through infiltration to vegetation so that the plants are taking it up, and then it's reducing the amount of water that's actually ultimately ending up in the sewer. So there are projects like that, and I think particularly once we've got a couple on the ground and done, it will then make it much easier to implement in future ones as well.
Nothing to add on what I can't talk. Nothing to add on top of what Matt and Hilary have already shared.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman, I might bring some other councillors in and then come back to you. We've got other, unless there's anything. Yeah, please, yeah, come in. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add to the final point about the table with the overspills, if that could come back up again. I just wanted it to be made clear that those two sites, the Hardwick site and the Haslingfield site, were particularly bad. However, across South Cambridgeshire as a whole, we've had 13,064 hours of these drains running, which is just incredible. Thank you.
Did you want to comment on that at all? No? Okay. Councillor James Hogarth.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a question about communication, and it's based on an incident that I was dealing with in my ward in June in the village of Foulmere, where we had raw sewage erupting from the ground in several places in people's gardens, including to such a degree that several vulnerable residents contacted me because they were unable to use their own lavatories and washing facilities for weeks. I'm going to quote one of the emails I received just so that you understand the situation. It says, "We now have raw sewage bubbling out of our manhole and it has been flowing through our garden for 2 weeks. We have stopped the children from playing in their own garden and even cancelled our son's birthday party last weekend due to the smell and concern for hygiene safety." So I was contacted by a lot of people in the village. They had obviously contacted Anglian Water many times, were given minimal information about what the problem was and about how it's being dealt with and when they could expect improvement. There was a lot of frustration with the level of information provided. Obviously this is very good because tankers came in and started pumping the sewage out, which was clearly a very useful response to the problem. Unfortunately, that also generated a lot of disquiet. The tankers were working day and night. I had emails from people saying they couldn't sleep because there was a tanker outside their door pumping away. So it was clearly understood that there was a problem with the pump that was servicing the village of some kind, but the information that people were given was not really consistent. We didn't know whether there was a fault with the pump that was being repaired, and so we didn't know if it was about to be repaired and would suddenly start pumping well again. We didn't know whether or not this was a problem that didn't have a short-term fix because it was simply due to the level of flooding. And the impression, I'm afraid, was that Anglian Water is a rather impenetrable organisation when it comes to getting information about what's going on, where the people who understand what's going on were hiding behind phone banks of probably long-suffering people answering the phone, talking to angry residents. And this doesn't just raise issues about communication, it also causes problems for the reputation of Anglian Water, because the assumption is that if the company isn't telling people what's going on, they may not be on top of the situation at all, right? So eventually, of course, the water levels receded, the pumping stopped, the immediate problem went away. But I'm afraid the poor impression that the company has left does remain. At the time, I asked repeatedly for online meetings with a local representative, a local manager, just so that there could be some communication of the key details of the situation to residents in the area, but I couldn't get a meeting of that type. Since then, there has been a positive development, which is that there's now a multi-stakeholder advisory group to which someone from our parish council has been invited and I've been invited. That is a big step forward from having no real answers. And so I would say thank you very much for doing that. It's clearly a step in the right direction. However, even with this group being in place, then it has still been quite difficult to understand exactly what went wrong. What is the stage of Anglian Water's investigation into the failure of the infrastructure in the village, and what measures have been or are going to be taken to prevent a recurrence of it. So really, I want to underline the importance of meaningful and regular communication with customers in this kind of situation, because I can tell you they didn't get what they felt was meaningful and regular communication in this instance, especially when things are going wrong. So there are local councillors around, people like myself or the parish councillors who would really like to help the flow of communication. And we found that our hands were tied. We couldn't get the information to pass on that we needed to pass on. I think that if customers do have enough information, they can understand what the issue is. And what they really want is enough information so that they can have the confidence that you're on top of the problem and have a viable plan to solve it and make things better next time. So really, that's a long-winded way of saying, how are you planning to improve the communication systems so that this kind of incident doesn't happen again? Thanks.
Okay, Water. Yeah, so thanks, Councillor Albro. I know exactly what happened at Falmere, and we do apologise, obviously, for the poor communication that people might experience at the time. Not to make excuses, but we are a business of a finite amount of people, and Falmere was one of hundreds, if not more, villages that were affected by the flooding when it was particularly bad. And we do try to get around everybody as best we can. And again, back to what Lucy said earlier about prioritisation, the people that have flooding or loss of toilets in their houses, the priorities, external flooding is next on the list, and so forth. The MAG, the multi-entity groups you mentioned, are definitely a step in the right direction, and we've set up 10 of those across our region based on the previous experience of flooding. I'm glad you're involved in the one that covers Falmere. Things are going to get better in that respect. I think Lucy goes to those as well. Me or my team will be there as well in terms of an engagement point of view. And I think we absolutely take that on board. We need to get better at communication. We're also do a lot of work with our online community. So basically our website, where people can actually go on and see what's happening on our check system. So it's an Anglian Water check system where you can put your postcode in or your address in, and it gives you a polygon over where you live, and that should give you some information about what's going on as well. That includes things like, are we tankering, what are the likely levels going to be, how long we're going to last for, where to get extra help from. So that's an evolution from the last flooding lessons learned as well. So that's going to get better as well. So and we've also got the ability to proactively send emails out to people that have signed up to Anglian Water system as well. So if you're on an Anglian Water system as a customer and you sign up, we can proactively engage that way as well to give people information. So yeah, apologies again for the experience that happened in Falmere. It wasn't great, and I think we've learned a lot, and we are going to get better. In terms of the operational view, Lucy, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, yes, I came into post beginning of August in the role, which is when I picked up, obviously, the multi-agency group. Something that I've 100% agree, I think, is that we need to be better at communication. It's something that I've committed to as being part of this multi-stakeholder group. We have agreed within the group that if anything, in the event that tankers are put on, that the parish councils are made aware in order so that you have something to talk about with residents. If you have specific things that you'd like to go over in terms of what happened last year, or you want some briefings ahead of what we're doing proactively this year, I'm more than happy to catch up outside of this as part of it. I've got some site visits at the end of the month to go to certain locations who are in the multi-entity group. That is also with the Environment Agency and the County Council. If that's something that you're interested in, I can also speak to you about that afterwards. We've also got a rundown in terms of Falmere, Foxton, Triplo, all of those are some of our most flooded areas in terms of groundwater. It's been quite difficult, and we've had investment because they all pump to each other. The impact only gets greater as you go on to Foxton because that's where the works is. We've had infiltration surveying that's been out in Foxton this month as well as Falmere. When I say infiltration surveying, just to be clear, this is when a team go out, they camera the foul network. They look for sources of infiltration, whether that's from elements where there might be from groundwater. Potentially, if investment allows, they can actually go down to a property level and look at removing surface water if it's incorrectly connected, as well as gullies. Obviously, again, there's only a finite pot of money, but we've started there because that's where we did have the most issues, and you're correct in the tankering side of things. As I said, hopefully being in position now and with this multi-agency group is something that I would definitely like to commit better to.
James,
just to quickly add as well, I think just to put the record straight about the cause of the issues, the pumps were working as they should, so I think there's some information that wasn't quite right about things not running properly. They were flat out, in effect, for many days. Yeah, all 24/7, as you say, Lucy. So I think that, yeah, our assets were operating as they should be. It's just literally the volume was overwhelming the network.
Councillor James Hogarth.
So, I mean, thanks for the responses. I'm encouraged that you're looking at communication anew. I'm hopeful that the MAGs will help. I mean, they at least provide a direct, parish council level to you guys in a meeting where people can ask questions, and it's the opportunity to ask a straight question and get a straight answer with enough detail. That's what was missing, and I think that's basically what residents want. They want an explanation that isn't just vague. Oh yes, we understand what's going on and we're working on it. That is has enough detail to actually explain what happened and just to give them confidence that something is being done that will actually make it less likely to happen in the future. And I'd just say finally, don't underestimate the reputational damage from that sort of brick wall effect of phoning up and just not really getting anything satisfactory back. I think you might need to look at the experience of customers who phone up in really difficult situations like this, and don't get enough information to really help them understand what's going on. So yeah, I look forward to how you're planning to improve it. Thank you.
So the customer journey when people ring us up is something that we continually review. We have regular weekly calls with our customer services team who look at the scripting that our call centre use, who look at the journey that customers go on. But I'll refer back to my earlier point, but it's about making sure the most appropriate agency they're referred to the most appropriate agency, and regrettably information given to our call centre agents in terms of what people think the root cause is often incorrect. And that can lead people to think they're getting passed from pillar to post when we refer them to the highways refer them to EA, and EA send them back to us. Perfectly, but as I said, it goes back to my earlier point. What I would say is that we don't hide behind the phones, far from it. During Storm Babette and Storm Hank, myself and Grant are out most evenings, whether it be parish council meetings, MP meetings, or meetings like this, putting ourselves at the forefront to be scrutinised, to get questions asked and to pass that information on. And I would say if any parish council wants a meeting to ask for information, they just need to let us know, and we'll go and give that information. That's not a problem at all. But point taken about the difficulty in the communication at that point. But we are only a finite member of staff. What I also want is to pick up a point though, just briefly about toilets you mentioned, because it's a point that it has been a challenge right across the water industry, right across the UK. And there's a big gap in legislation at the moment that causes that difficulty, where in the declared incident, it's declared in the Civil Contingencies Act that the district council is responsible for providing alternative provisions in most circumstances. When there's not a declared incident, DEFRA have verbally confirmed to Anglian Water it's not in water company's remit to do that, but it's not in the district council's remit either. So there is a gap in legislation that there are many subgroups and working groups across our region working to look at actually what does alternative provision look like for people, because some councillors will say it's as simple as putting a portaloo on someone's garden. Well, it's not, because where we did do that, many people didn't even use portaloos. I mean, you've got to think about bathing, hygiene, washing clothes. What do people do about that? So there's a much wider conversation going on about what alternative provision looks like in most situations where there's not flooding as such, which doesn't warrant an incident being declared, but where sewer networks are full of groundwater, full of surface water, and people then flush their toilets and they don't have use of it. So I just wanted to cover that point because I think that's really important.
Councillor James Howbury.
Thank you. So, there's one follow-up I'd like to pursue there, actually, because you mentioned the communication with parish councils, and I think that is a really crucial avenue if we're to get to the bottom of some of these multi-agency issues. So it's the parish councils that are in a position to be able to say, look, this is the part of our ditch network that's blocked, and go to, I don't know, whether it's Lee or someone at the county or a landowner or whatever to try and deal with that. And I think maintaining a proactive set of communication with the parish councils can really help with fixing this for the future and making sure that those groundwater levels are not getting up to the level where these sorts of incidents happen. Thanks.
Can I just come very briefly back on the point that Matt made about the gap in legislation in terms of who is responsible for providing portaloos and so forth, or provision. Is that currently being addressed in legislation, or is that something that's not? Is that gap still existing and not being looked at, or is it? Yeah.
So in terms of legislation, it's not currently being looked at. What we are doing, and we had a very good constructive conversation with Norfolk County Council and the two districts that report into Norfolk about what actually we can do better without legislation as a partnership in order to provide that. So there are conversations going on, but it's difficult if no one's got a responsibility to do it. I'm sure you're aware, finding funding to actually do something is very difficult if you don't have to do something. So it's about then what can we do essentially as a gesture of goodwill to make life easier and help customers that we all have responsibility to. So it's not an easy answer, but with climate changing, it's likely to happen more often, and that's the problem.
Yeah. So in that interim period, there needs to be an agreement almost as to who is responsible, because if we don't know who's responsible, that's quite a problem. Yeah.
I don't think you'll get an agreement of who's going to be responsible. I think the best we can hope for is, like we are doing in other areas, let's have a chat about taking a combined partnership approach, because actually if you spread the cost of, for example, opening a village hall up, if the village hall can remain on facilities, opening a village hall up for 6 weeks and maybe putting a few washing machines in there, if you spread that across multiple agencies, it becomes cheaper for everyone.
Have you had those meetings with South Cambs and Cambridgeshire County Council? Not yet. Is that something in your view that should happen sooner rather than later?
Yeah, we wanted to start the conversation with one area to see how what the kind of ideas that came out of that. But absolutely, you've got my word that we will. We can get together with South Cambs and Cambridgeshire County Council and have those similar conversations.
Thanks very much. Councillor Anna Bradnam, and then I'll come on to Councillor Sue Ellington.
Thank you very much, Chair. So we've had a lot of questions to Anglian Water, so I'm going to give the County Council and the District Council some questions instead. Not that we won't necessarily come back to Anglian Water, but just to give you some fresh voices, as it were. So 2 things, and they're linked. The first is, what is the County Council doing about its general programme of jetting culverts under roads? And I'm looking at one particular officer in question who should know all about it, because we have had a particular case in our village where we have not a formal flood group, but a group of people who have worked very hard to clear a ditch in order to make sure water is carried away from the village of Milton. And we have waited since last September 2022 or 3 for the culverts under the road to be jetted. I would also add in that what's important is that when the County Council does jet culverts, they also jet the laterals into the ditches. And I'm adding into this a question sort of latterly that perhaps Lee Helen could answer later, which is, to what degree do you feel that you have the capacity to handle the water and the surface water runoff that then flows into the ordinary and award watercourses for which District Council is responsible? I say this in particular because Milton is close to the River Cam, but the ground is very, very flat. And so the flow and the fall is very, very shallow. So if we don't have a good working flood system, drainage system, then the land not only floods very quickly, but also the water doesn't get away quickly. So it's twofold. It's what is the County Council doing about regular jetting? Because it used to be done twice a year, I believe, and it's now if you need it kind of thing. But there's also the element of that then goes into the ordinary watercourses and the awarded watercourses, and I wanted to understand what's being done there. So County Council first, and I think then District Council later. Please.
So, yeah, I'm abundantly aware of the case you're citing, and that's due for revisiting, at least from the point of view of understanding what more needs to be done from the highways perspective, particularly with respect to any assets belonging to Cambridgeshire Highways that are beneath the highway, because typically that would fall to them and to their responsibility to maintain, but possibly only to the extent to which it's relevant and pertinent to the drainage of the highway maintained at the public expense. But in any event, the location you're mentioning does need revisiting from the point of view of just basically understanding what more could highways achieve, riparian maintenance upstream and downstream notwithstanding, that we can look at afresh. In general terms, there is cyclical maintenance and routine maintenance that Cambridgeshire Highways do carry out. I mean, I'm speaking without them being here, but this is what I glean and gather and understand and infer from dealing and working with them. Typically, the one element of the cleansing doesn't always necessarily take account of our lateral from a gully pot to an outfall or to a watercourse. It's typically just the chamber and the pot that they would empty, but nevertheless, as part of a different cleansing maintenance, they would. It's each case in its own merit, and it depends on the circumstances per time how they address that. They've obviously got a duty to maintain the highway free of obstructions, and under the relevant legislation, which is the Highways Act 1980, and they do that by routing surface water, highway surface water, into any available watercourse they can. That in turn puts a responsibility on riparian landowners and residents to keep their sections clear, which irks them sometimes, which is understandable. But nevertheless, we are working well and in collaboration with another team that's been set up within Highways called the Drainage and Resilience Team to complement and enhance the work they and we do with respect to highway surface water drainage and flood alleviation per property or land. And our paths cross frequently and regularly, week on week, in towards achieving that. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just to add to what Brian was saying there, so in terms of the sort of regular cleansing of the gullies, I know historically it was undertaken for many, many decades, I think, on a fairly ad hoc basis. And then a decision was made to then go to every 2 years for each of the gullies. And as Brian's already said, that does relate to the gully itself, so like the grate on the top, the pot that sits within it, and not necessarily for that pipe. But again, that is something that I think we're looking into with Highways colleagues. And I mentioned before about the disconnect when residents are reporting flooding, whether it's on the highway, from the highway, in their house, from the garden, and that not being clear. And I think it's fair to say there's also that disconnect. You know, we are all Cambridgeshire County Council, whether it's Highways, whether it's the flood team. So we need to do a little bit more on making sure that that's brought together, which we are definitely looking at the moment with senior management there as to how we can make it easier for people to know, like a one-stop shop really, for anything drainage related. In terms of culverts beneath the highway as well, again, they are not maintained in the same way as the gullies, so it's not necessarily every year or every 2 years, but they're done on a risk-based approach as well. So I think if there are areas where it would fundamentally impact the drainage of the highway, or it would impact the stability of the highway by a culvert being damaged, that would be prioritised over one where it was blocked but not having a material impact on the highway. But again, I'm aware of the case in question that you're asking about, so we can look into that particular area and when that's going to be cleaned out.
Thank you, Chair. So, in particular, a lot of work was done by riparian landowners to clear the ditch through Milton, such that the only bit that's blocked, and still is the bit, the culvert underneath, firstly, Old School Lane, and then secondly, as it goes further north, under Fen Road. And you know, we have been waiting since September to have these culverts jetted. Now, the residents, and including myself, did dig out the ditch, and the South Cams and our waste disposal team were extremely helpful at South Cams and took away all of the arisings of vegetation that were cut away. And so we waited and waited and waited, and we haven't had those culverts jetted, with the result that just recently one of the riparian residents said, you know, what's happened? And in fact, recently, I've been aware that this culvert is still absolutely blocked to the top. There is no way for the water to go, even though residents have done that work. So I will take that up with you later. But separately, I want to come to South Cams, because this is an extrapolation of my permission, if you like, Chair, but I wanted to come to Lee Hillam to ask about whether South Cams has the capacity to assist village flood resilience groups. We have a major infrastructure being planned between our villages, between Milton and Waterbeach, the GCP Waterbeach to Cambridge busway, and that cuts across a number of ditches which drain this, as I've just described, this very flat area that relies on free running ditches to take water towards the Cam and towards the internal drainage board area when it's then pumped into the Cam. So we rely very much on those drains being kept free, and Lee and his team has done a great job around the village of Milton. But I just wanted to establish two things. One, whether the South Cams team feels they have sufficient capacity to do the work that's being done within villages, but also whether you have a working relationship with the South Cams Highways, the County Council Highways team, to cooperate with the work that you've been doing beside, you know, that requires culverts to be cleared in order to get the work done. Sorry, that's a bit complicated, but I hope you can answer some of that.
Lee.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. So, probably picking up from the start, I think it has to be recognised that leadership team and with members' help, the awarded watercourse team has been expanded considerably since 2020. around 2020 when I took over, there was only 3 colleagues, and now there's 5, so that's quite a big increase. And there's been a good investment on equipment, both to deal with climate change and be more smart about how we work. So there's been a great improvement there. I think it would be fair to say that residents have probably felt that in terms of we've been keeping up with the work and we've been delivering a good service. I hope that's the case. What I would say in terms of resources is there is always more we can do. I think that it would be fair to say what I've noticed from feedback that I've received from parishes, particularly parishes that are along the Ouse catchment, is that they felt that there was a lot of emphasis put on arranging flood groups and providing support by South Cambridgeshire District Council following the 2020 floods. But of course that was only a temporary position that was put in. And of course since the floods of 2020 and the following 6 months when support was given to set up these groups, and quite often I think it was a lady called Cecilia who was there at the time. It was some time ago now, so excuse me for that. She provided an excellent conduit for people to go between officers, to provide information that the county council supply on flood risk, and generally tie up the gap between environment operations, so our team that actually goes out there and does the management of the watercourses, and the county council who provide advice on flood protection and stuff like that. I think it has to be recognised that there are challenges with flooding, and not all of those can be resolved quickly. And quite often or not, reports suggest that sometimes the best way to deal with it is to be prepared and to have the right things and the right information in place. And certainly where flood groups exist and they're very well organised, we've seen since 2020 that those parishes seem to get the best results when there's a flooding being organised. It doesn't always stop people's properties from flooding, but people are much more positive and much more organised. So I think that there is a little bit of a gap there. As I said, just repeating myself, I think that some parishes feel now that there's not that intermediary person to go to. In awarded watercourse operations, we do try to extend out as much as we can. We know we've got a civic duty to help all residents in all circumstances. And we do work with the Drainage and Resilience team for the County Council and with the County Council directly on riparian watercourse issues. There's been some good examples of that. Our team are very familiar with all of your water problems in most of the parishes. We know the district quite intimately, and all of the issues that have been raised, I'm very well aware of. So in essence, I think that the flood group coordinator post that's not here now was very much valued, and so I think that there's a gap. I think that locally, if we're talking about Milton in particular, I know you raised that, Councillor Bradnam, the 13th public drain is an awarded watercourse that runs through Milton, and it's a very flat-lying watercourse. There are concerns for connections being made to that watercourse because already landowners, I believe the college, suffers regular flooding. There is only so much you can achieve by even optimising your maintenance to get the best out of the system that's there, and we try and do that. It's not for me to approve or deny connections. That's for obviously the county council and the planning team to assess with their drainage engineers and stuff. But I think that there is in that area only so much that can be achieved, and I think it's fairly close to what can be put in there at the moment. I know that there's been some suggestion about upgrading the watercourse, and could we ask people who are connecting to the watercourse to offer upgrades or things that can be done. It's very difficult to do those upgrades when you're so close to the river because we're already very close to the river discharge level. So it's not just about digging watercourses deeper or making them wider and adding additional gradients and things like that. You are very limited to what you can do. So I think in areas like that, and there are a few across the district like that where there's general issue points, if you like, but we need to be sensitive in those areas to what can be added and what can't be. But again, I'm not a drainage engineer, so I don't provide those approvals, but I do work with the County Council when an ordinary watercourse consent or something planning-wise comes across. I do comment on those with them to give them the information.
Thank you. Councillor Bradham, do you want?
Thank you. So that's really helpful, Lee. Thank you. And with regarding to connection and whether there's sufficient capacity for connection, you're meaning for surface water runoff, aren't you?
Yes, that's correct. And of course, I think the principles, I'm not a planning expert, but I think that the principles of planning and SUDS is obviously to not increase the flow rates and volumes. I think for the purposes of systems that are attenuated, which seems to be a SUDS thing that's used, although that doesn't increase and it controls the flow rates into the watercourse, it does introduce volume over time, so residents see that watercourse levels are higher for longer, and that's an attenuation system working correctly. But of course it does leave water in the system much longer than it normally would do. Okay. And I have to support other colleagues here in their views around groundwater. There's a particularly large amount of groundwater and issues around groundwater in the systems at the moment. So residents will see that by as soon as there's a small amount of rain, watercourse levels rise immediately rather than having that delayed effect that normally happens. So, yeah.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Sue Ellington, please.
Thank you. For my sins, I am also District Councillor for Fen Drayton, and the flood levels in Fen Drayton are very different from those of Swavesey, and driven by the flood levels locally in the River Ouse and adjacent waterways. And we know that when Bedford gets flooded, 3 days later, Fen Drayton will be flooded, and they've only just got rid of the last flood. The water levels in the village are regularly observed to be the same as those in the river and adjacent waterways. Whether the water in the village has originated from the river backflowing or from water draining upstream from, it is the end of it's the sump of the rest of the villages. It obviously cannot drain out of the village to below the level of the river at any given time. The river is clearly being held back at Browns Hill Sluice during floods. It's a narrower part of the river. A noticeable drop in water height can be observed between the upstream and downstream sides of the broken sluice gates, which have been broken for some time. The flow across the top of the two broken closed sluice gates, because it's broken and they're keeping it closed, where the flow across the top is significantly less than the flow through the working open sluice gates, fairly obviously. This can be observed in a photograph I provided, but I don't know whether we have it available. Although some of the water at Browns Hill Sluice flows through the lock when both gates are open and around the sluice gates during time of flood, there is a clear opportunity to increase the flow by repairing the two broken sluice gates. Increasing the flow through Browns Hill Sluice staunch should have a material impact on flood levels in Fen Drayton and similar villages. And really we're asking, can this be done? I understand the gates are available, but they don't seem to be being put into the broken sluice. So this is Environment Agency rather than Anglia Water.
Thanks very much, Environment Agency.
Sure, absolutely, yeah, happy to provide a bit of an update on this. So you might be aware that we've been having challenges with the Browns Hill Sluice, but also the St Ives Sluice. Similar issues in that we've had to isolate a number of the gates in the closed position. The reason for that is that there are different kind of mechanical issues going on there, but both of them resulting in a lack of confidence that we would I can't talk tonight, can I? That a lack of confidence that we would be able to confidently move the gates up and down in different situations as we normally would. So what we've had to do is isolate them in the closed position, because what we have at those two sites is a statutory requirement to maintain water levels for navigation. So what we have to do is close those gates rather than secure them open so that the water level doesn't drop out, bottoms drop, boats drop out, etc. So that's why they're in the situation they're in at the moment. What we are doing is trying to progress works to repair both those structures. So you may have seen we've got a live citizen space page, or a web page, basically, you can Google it, online to update communities on the situation with these. And back in mid-September, we were luckily able to share that we have had funding approved to carry out repairs to the St Ives structure. So now our attentions are turning more towards the Browns Hill sluice structure as well. We did bid for funding for repairs in this year, and unfortunately we weren't successful, so we're now progressing down a secondary route. We will also be gathering evidence, modelling evidence, everything that we've been doing for St Ives to evaluate the impact and the amount of flood risk kind of capital funding that we might be able to attract. Being really honest, we're expecting it to be very, very small amounts, so we're probably going to have to have a look at alternative avenues like we have with St Ives. But I think the information that I will share with you is, although we do have gates that are in that closed position and it will have an impact on river levels, we do expect that impact to be very local. We wouldn't expect it to have any impact on the levels in Fen Drayton. Just to give a sense of that, the detailed modelling that we've had done on St Ives, even with all 7 of those gates closed, we would only expect an impact on river levels to about 1 kilometre in distance. So obviously in Browns Hill we don't have that for that extreme scenario, so we wouldn't expect it to have an impact on Fen Drayton, but it is something that we're actively looking into at the moment, so we'll keep the community up to date as that progresses. And if you could wish us luck in securing funding, that would be appreciated too.
Councillor Ellington.
Thank you. I suppose my frustration is that Fen Drayton was built knowing that it was likely to flood, and therefore the road makes a very nice river and the houses are all built quite high. But that doesn't help the fact that the only way you measure a problem is whether houses get flooded. And therefore, as Fen Drayton houses don't get flooded, you don't consider it to be as high a priority as others. And the issue is that there are people who are fixed in their homes, they cannot get out, particularly in Daintrees, where for weeks and weeks on end, and they can't get their cars out, and it is a real problem for Fen Drayton, and it's not being addressed. The people of Fen Drayton assure me it's not being addressed at parish councils.
Environment Agency.
Thank you. Yeah, totally appreciate that concern. As you say, our top priority is where we see property flooding internally, and part of the reason of that is it's more impactful than road flooding, but that doesn't mean that flooding of roads and access and egress issues, particularly in Daintrees Road, they do have a really big impact. We actually did a joint community event with Cambridge County Council colleagues back in, was it May, earlier this summer, and so we spoke to a lot of residents about the flooding that they've experienced. The challenge that the Environment Agency has is that the way that the funding rules are set by government really heavily weight funding eligibility towards internal property flooding, and in a horrible way, the more internal property flooding you have, the better, because the more money you can get to then do something about it. And that's the challenge we have with Fen Drayton, that we don't see that internal property flooding to attract that funding. I am aware, if it's all right to hand over to Hilary, that Cambridgeshire County Council are also looking at a number of alternative options though.
Thank you. So at the beginning of my introduction, I mentioned that we maintain a flood risk management strategy, and in that there's an action plan associated with that, and we identified, when it was published, it was 2021 I think, 16 locations across the county where we needed to look into flood risk in more detail, and that was based on the number of flood reports we'd had, various measures in there, and at the time Fen Drayton wasn't listed. We commenced a project to look at these 16 locations, so we've commissioned consultants to go out and actually they've kind of just completed the first stage, which is looking at all the different levels of risk from the different sources, and then almost if money was no object, what could we possibly do in those locations to try and reduce flood risk, because with a view to ultimately approaching partners. But in the process, and Swavesey is one of the locations that we've been looking at, but in the process, it was highlighted that actually some of the risk in Swavesey is also impacted by Fen Drayton, which is upstream, and ultimately Connington and Ellsworth as well. So we only recently extended that project to look at Fen Drayton and Ellsworth. And in some ways, fortuitously, we'd organised a meeting with the parish council and representatives of the flood group in Fen Drayton on the Monday where it was flooded particularly badly. So I attended and saw firsthand just how bad it was. And that really hit home for me, just seeing that whilst properties weren't flooded, you know, Daintrees, it was 2 or 3 feet deep in places. And there was somebody driving in who happened to, luckily have a Range Rover, I think it was, that has the ability to lift itself. And that was the only way he could get in and out. And I know people were having to get shopping delivered to friends and relatives around the village and deliver it by hand through people's gardens. So I think it just highlights how important it is. So that piece of work is still underway for Fen Drayton. That's why it's a little bit delayed, because we weren't aware of quite how significant it was until we'd looked at Swavesey. That report and everything associated with it is due to be completed fairly soon, sort of in the next month or two. And then that's where we'll present the findings to partners and say, look, is there anything we can do jointly to try and address those risks?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will report back.
Councillor Stephen Drew.
Who was sat for so long and just gone. Okay, thank you. I have questions for each group. I'll start with Anglian Water, please. Is it in your interests to delay the adoption of roads by not adopting the sewers in new build towns?
So we have a stringent set of standards that have to be met for sewers to be adopted. Those standards are part of the section 104 and 106 adoption standards. And we will not adopt those sewers until those standards are met. And the unfortunate consequence of that is that, you're right, highway authorities generally don't adopt the highways until the sewers are transferred and adopted over.
Okay, so I'll give you a specific example. So it's a primary school in Upper Campbell, near to where we are here. I'm the councillor, one of the councillors for Campbell. The primary school is facing significant difficulty in relation to keeping the children safe. There are problems with parking. There are problems with maintaining the safety of visitors to the school. One of the significant blocks on protecting the children coming to school is the fact that the road around the school is unadopted. The road will not be adopted until the sewer is adopted. We talk to Cambridge County Council about adopting the road, and Cambridge County Council tell us they can't stop the road because the sewer isn't adopted. And we talk to you, and you tell us you can't stop the sewer because it doesn't reach the standards you want it to reach. We talk to the developer, who tell us we have done everything we need to do. If I could refer back to my colleague, Councillor Dr. James Hobro. When making the decisions that you make not to adopt the sewer, because it is your belief it does not meet the standards, do you consider the reputational damage that it causes you as a company to be held responsible in that regard, or is that not something that you consider? I ask this question on behalf of a group of extremely disappointed and frustrated residents who, I'm starting with you, who hold you in part responsible for the fact that they cannot have road safety around the school.
So I would say to move this forward, let's get our development services team, the developer and highways on site at the same time. But I'd stick by my point. We have a duty to our bill-paying customers to make sure that all assets we adopt are of a certain standards. We won't delay adopting an asset for any other reason other than it doesn't hit the standards that are in the 104 and 106 guidelines. So let's get this site meeting arranged and let's get a decision made forward. Get right people in the room on site and let's get this sorted. But you know, I'll state we don't purposely delay the adoption of anything other than the minimum standards being met.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm just going to ask you one more question in relation to something that Grant said earlier. One of the things that you picked up on was the fact that Anglian Water was created as a result of the privatisation bill, which is now 35 years ago. Yes, 35 years ago. I would have thought that one of the things that as a significant public service provider you would have wanted to do during those 35 years was to have developed relationships with housing developers, especially in areas such as Camborne and other new towns in South Cambridgeshire, which would have meant that the situation that Matt is referring to perhaps wouldn't have arisen. So I would question, my question to you is, what are you doing to work with the developers when you consider that South Cambridgeshire is going to have tens of thousands of more homes in the coming years and decades? I cannot imagine that you want to be in a position where somebody is asking the kind of question that I'm asking of you. Fantastic answer from Matt, absolutely brilliant. I will look forward to that taking place and we'll work together on it. But what are you doing as a company to, shall we say, encourage the developers who at the moment, according to Matt's answer, you are effectively holding responsible for not meeting the standards, which means that you can't adopt the sewer?
So we have a number of often known as KPIs, but we call them ODIs, outcome delivery incentives, that Ofwat give us to abide by. And one of those is around what we call DMEX, which is the developer experience, if you like. How well do developers rate us on a number of factors? And we're scored in terms of DMEX of every single other water company, like we are with CMEX, our customer experience matrix. DMEX is quite new. It's only been around the last kind of 5 years. So it's not just something we like to do. We do hold relationships with a number of developers, especially the national ones that develop on a large scale. But it's something that our ODIs force us to do essentially. So what I would say is that clearly there's been a breakdown of communication here, but nothing that I believe a site meeting cannot resolve. And it goes back to Councillor's point earlier about communication and making sure that we are contactable and the right things can be escalated to the right people so we can get decisions made and issues resolved swiftly.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, so literally hot off the press, so Anglian Water do host quite a lot of external meetings and workshops with large developers. In fact, we're doing a regional one in January. I can let you know the details, held in Peterborough, where we've got some fairly big hitters like the National Homes Quarry and all sorts of other ministers possibly coming to talk about that very topic, about how we can work better with developers to deliver the housing that's going to be coming. Everywhere, not just in South Cambs, but across most of East Anglia, by the looks of it, and how we can get the developers to work with us better, not only on things like adoption of services, but also on water efficiency and making sustainable housing, and also the flood problem we mentioned earlier about surface water. So I can share some details about that event. Would love to have South Cambs there, and you can see us in action. Our chief executive will be there talking to fairly senior sort of stakeholders about that very topic. So.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to go now through all four. Before I ask this question, I feel it should be very, very clear. You obviously don't attend scrutiny and overview meetings on a regular basis. I have something of an obsession with the concept of public accountability, and I also have something of an obsession with the concept of ensuring that everything that we do, whether it be you as statutory agencies, you as a private company, or we as councillors, is done in a way that absolutely meets the standards and expectations of the Nolan principles and meets the standards and expectations of all of us in terms of looking after residents, customers or whatever first. So please bear that in mind as I ask this question, and please do not feel this is a suggestion that you are acting inappropriately. However, it is something I am interested in. My question is going to be this. As four organisations here, you strike me as knowing each other well. You strike me as being on first name terms with each other. You strike me as being able to look at each other in the eye and pass questions over to each other. Now, in one respect, that is lovely. That is absolutely brilliant. And anyone looking at a wide-ranging structure would obviously say, of course, the Environment Agency should have a good relationship with Anglian Water, the District Council, the County Council, whatsoever. But my question to you is, and I would kind of probably pick one person from each organisation to answer this, probably the most senior person, how do you ensure that your ongoing working with each other, your development of professional relationships, which could possibly refer to as professional friendships, and the fact that you work together so well, how do you absolutely ensure that at no point does your relative close working relationship get in the way of you fulfilling your obligations to the public, whether you are a public body or you are a private company? You will know that at times residents, voters, public people do get concerned about the closeness of relationships between big organisations. So I'm happy to start with our District Council colleague and then to move along to our County Council, our Environment Agency and then Anglian Water. I hope that my question is clear.
Thank you, Councillor Drew. It's a good question. I think that we have a duty under the Flood and Water Management Act to all work together as partners. So we need to bear that in mind, and I think that's something that we have to demonstrate. I think that's clear that we're doing that from your account. As a district council, we are measured for what we do by residents, and I think that the feedback we get from that, from our residents, suggests that we do a good job for the things that we handle specifically in regard to our awarded water courses. I'd like to also point out that we don't only just work with the County Council on our own residents' issues, we actually work with the County Council and partners on other councils' issues as well. So South Cambs District Council quite often get involved in issues that Huntingdonshire District Council have or other councils, and we take appropriate cost back from those tasks. So for instance, the County Council ask us to intervene sometimes to correct riparian issues that they're having, not just within South Cambs, but within other districts as well, and we provide service to correct those issues as well. So I think integrity-wise, not only do I think we can say that we do a good job for our own residents, but we actually extend our civic duties out well beyond our standard awarded water course duties within our own district. I can't prove that other than give you examples of specifically where that's happened. I think our relationship is growing with other organisations such as Anglia Water and the Environment Agency. So whilst it might be deemed that we know them very well and we all work together, our only actual involvement is in an accountable forum where we discuss through the multi-agency groups with Anglia Water and other partners and the CP Flow group as well. So our workings there in those groups are in an accountable forum, often with parish members and councillors involved in those as well. And most of our workings come from issues that are raised through those groups with appropriate actions that are hopefully delivered and seen by residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so Lee's covered some of the points around the duties that we have under the Flood and Water Management Act, and we're acutely aware of those and discharging those duties. So we do recognise the importance of working really closely with all of the partners here, and I think, as you've highlighted there, it works well in terms of the delivery of improvements for our residents. I think it's also fair to say that between all of our organisations, there's also some unpleasant conversations that we have to have. And a couple of examples I can think I would say, given fair challenge to the Environment Agency around the Browns Hill and the St Ives sluice situation. And I know Anglian Water's fairly challenged us recently regarding some issues around drainage in the north of the county. So there are lots of pleasant conversations. There are also lots of unpleasant conversations. And Lee mentioned the Cambridgeshire, it's called CP Flow, but it's the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Flood and Water Management Partnership. And that is a representation of all of us here, lots of other organisations as well. And we've got elected member representation from all of our districts on there with an agreed terms of reference. So in that sense, it's held accountable.
So I won't repeat everything everyone said about the Flood and Water Management Act. I would say for the Environment Agency, we have a very careful line to tread here. We are a risk management authority and a Category 1 responder, and around that local flood resilience forum table, there is an absolute necessity for us to work in very close and collegiate partnership to manage incidents. As a risk management authority, obviously, again, we need to be managing infrastructure and working out, as we've seen, all of the complicated ways in which water moves around in this part of the world, who takes responsibility for what, and again, we need to be working together for that. We are also a regulator, and that is where we have to draw a very careful line in terms of our relationships. Hilary described them as unpleasant conversations. I would call them robust conversations. But however you call them, I think our colleagues from Anglian Water talked about prosecutions from the Environment Agency. In my time, I have signed off enough of those to know they happen regularly. Also, in terms of our role responding to planning applications, again, we have been having very robust conversations with Anglian Water in terms of wastewater treatment works and plan changes to those, and those continue. Robust on both sides, I would say. There are public forums where we are held to account, so the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee is one of those places where, in terms of our role as risk management authorities, we sit around a table with elected members in an open public meeting. In fact, we had our Regional Flood and Coastal Committee today. So we are able to be completely transparent and accountable in terms of not just the way in which we work together, but the decisions that are made across our geography.
Very much. Of course.
Could I just add to that? Nobody's mentioned this, but resources doing the work we do are such that we're duty bound, in effect, to get it done, to collaborate in the way we do. Lee has helped me out and our team out with regard to several instances of getting water courses cleared that would otherwise either not get done or would get done at great expense and much later than you would want. We're all here, that the people that are here are suitably qualified, experienced, knowledgeable, and I would say professional, impartial and attached enough to be able to be mature enough in the way we do our work and responsible enough the way we do it to deliver the things we are aware we need to deliver, and we do it in that way.
Thank you.
So, being one of my remits, our strategic partners, is directly my bread and butter, really. I would say that we have a relationship with boundaries is probably a really good way to describe it. We have to cooperate. We've mentioned the Flood and Water Management Act, but in order to have a working relationship, you have to develop a personal relationship as well, and that's the only way to do business. We would be doing all our communities an injustice if we sat here squabbling about various rights and responsibilities. So we have to get along. There's an obligation for us to get along. But Hilary's mentioned where, Anglian Water in the north of Cambridgeshire, we're taking some very, very robust action against Cambridge County Council highways for some a complete lack of cooperation. So, we do have a relationship, but we will roll our sleeves up and do what's needed if and when the time comes to make sure we get the right outcomes for the communities. So hopefully it gives you some reassurance. Do I enjoy having a chat with Brian, about various things? Absolutely. But when business has to get done, we both know what needs to be done, for example.
Thank you. Appreciate all your very candid and clear answers.
Quickly to add as well, obviously, the regulation point is key for us. We're highly regulated as an industry. We're a monopoly as well, of course, so you've got no choice than to have Anglian Water, hence the robustness of our regulations. And as Sadie said, we're EA, regulators, Ofwat, we've got a drinking water inspectorate. So everything we do has to have that licence and that sort of guarantee that we're doing the best service we can, and we are scrutinised at a high level about that. But as Matt says, the relationships point is the key here. I think the fact that we come to these meetings, I suppose Anglian Water, we're not obliged in our makeup to come to anything like this, but we do because we choose to, because we want to. We want to be part of the conversation, and we want to be able to listen and take on board feedback and comments from the communities and from the elected members to go back and make our jobs easier to help those people in future. It's part of our DNA, Anglian Water. We're very much part of the communities we serve. A lot of us, all of us work and live in the region. So we operate as if we're part of the solution, not a barrier to progress. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I have one more, which unfortunately Anglian Water is just going to go to you. I would just point out that what you have just said in terms of saying that as a private company you're not obliged to come and do these things, but you choose to do so, may well actually provide the evidence to support Councillor Earle's argument for why a nationalised industry may well be seen as a better thing than a private company. Because if you are a nationalised company, you are by definition part of the public sector and are therefore by definition required to engage in such things. My question really, I've written down here too hard, question mark. And what my question is this. You have had 35 years as a privatised water company and you are still referring to Victorian sewers. It sounds to me like an excuse. In addition, you talk about your shareholders being in it for the long term. Put it bluntly, nobody forces your shareholders to invest in the water industry. Nobody does. It is their choice. They do it because they consider it to be something that has long-term economic benefits. They are not doing it to be a charity. They are not doing it purely out of public service. I recognise it's slightly different because some of it is pension funds, and I recognise that it's slightly different to, say, a hedge fund or such like, okay? What I'm getting at is this. You have made decisions over the last 35 years to how much money you invest. We are in the position we are in today with the problems that we arise, in part as a result of the decisions that your company have made in relation to the water services and sewage services in our region. You referred earlier to the fact that the Ofwat, as the regulator, will make a decision regarding the amount of money you are able to raise bills by, and you referred to 145, 157 and such like. You have chosen over a period of time to do the things that you have done. I know a lot of what you've talked about this evening is saying we're going to move forward, and some colleagues have talked about being in post a short period of time or whatever. Is running the water industry in the UK just too hard? Is it just too difficult? Is it just too much? Is it basically an impossible job? And therefore, despite the £10 billion investment that you refer to over the next 10 years, 5 years, my apologies, 10 billion in the next 5 years, are we basically just going to be sat here again in 5 years' time or 10 years' time if we remain in the current model, pretty much having the same questions? Or do you believe that actually it isn't too hard and you are about to engage in a radical transformation, which means all the issues that my colleagues have raised are going to go away?
So in short, I don't think it is hard. I mean, it's tough and challenging, but I mean, I can sit here today, and as someone who's been at Anglian Water for 30 years, in fact, I was a mere student when I joined and when we were privatised, so I do remember it briefly as a pre-privatised company. And I think you'll find a lot of people, maybe not Lucy, but maybe quite new to our team, but Anglian Water have got a lot of long-standing employees that believe in what they do and stayed there because it's a great place to work, and we do make a difference. I think the point about not choosing to invest, I would take you up on that, because our economic regulator decides what we can invest, not us. We wish we could invest more. We wish we could have put bills up, not for that reason to make more money for our shareholders, but to invest that money and get those improvements done over the last 30 years. The economic regulator, Ofwat, has been very strict and stringent on what price rises mean. Not to be too blunt, but a newly privatised industry isn't going to suddenly double your water bill overnight. Now it's in the private sector as opposed to the public sector. So there's a political point there, but you can argue that either way. But that's a fact. We've wanted to invest more, as has the rest of the water industry, for 30 years. We've been held back by regulation because people want to have cheaper bills. Water is cheap in this country. You know, you compare it to your energy bills. £1.45 a day. You couldn't buy a coffee in Starbucks for that. So I think, in context, it is what it is. It is a revolution coming. I think the £10 billion, a massive upheaval in investment, and we will be arguing our case strongly with our regulator to get that determination agreed. If it doesn't, then we'll do what we've done before and talk to the Competition and Markets Authority to argue the case. We need that money because we've heard people like yourself today in the communities who have suffered from lack of investment previously, and the things they have to deal with. We need to address that, and we can't do that without funding. And the model, as Councillor Hobro, I explained to him earlier, is the best model we've got, I think, in the UK. Investment up front, bills paid back over the life cycle of that asset. So not, it is difficult. It's not too hard. It's just we're constrained by many things, and we have to try and push through and get that investment delivered so we can make those improvements and see radical change. What I will say is we're never going to solve everything. Nothing, that's impossible to declare. You're never going to have no flooding. You're never going to have no problems with water resources. Water is a funny thing, as everyone probably around the room will testify to. It comes and goes at the wrong times, and things change very quickly. So we can never guarantee we're going to fix everything in 5-10 years. It's an ongoing process, and investment will come to meet that where best we can.
Yeah, what I'd say is that there's also a misunderstanding of what's actually happened since privatisation. The environment legislation has completely changed. During public ownership, it was, I don't take any pride in saying this, but it's acceptable to put raw sewage out to sea. It was done en masse. Since the late 80s, so much money has been invested on bringing sewage systems to towns and villages. Didn't happen first and foremost, where towns and villages relied on septic tanks and just discharges, quite frankly, into open water courses. The legislation has moved on, meaning that there has been investment, not to the level as Grant says that we would have wanted it to be, but there's been investment in things that people haven't seen, because we've come to take the fact that when we flush the toilet, our sewage, on the whole, is dealt with in a really good environmentally friendly way, and recycled and put back into the water body into a really good quality. People don't see that because they take it now for granted. So I would make the point that a nationalised water industry post-1990, with all the new environmental legislation that came in from our European friends, and for absolutely the right reasons, would have faced very similar challenges to a privatised water industry we've seen. We're looking at it in hindsight of kind of pre-1990, post-1990. What we need to look at is what legislation has been passed environmentally since then and forced the revolution of the water industry. So there has been investment, not maybe in what people see, but there has been real investment, not enough, quite frankly. But
thank you. Councillor Anna Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm mindful that we've been going for 2, if not 2.5 hours, so I'll be quick. But
I think you're the last to speak on my list.
Thank you.
I've got just a couple of brief points. Councillor Lehman, I see, is indicating to speak, but then we'll go just to have a discussion around the
in which case, all I was just going to say is at some point we might need a break, just a brief break. But anyway, what I wanted to ask of the Environment Agency and anybody else who feels they have useful comments to make on it was the whole of the water relations in this East Anglian region relies on the ancient water systems which are wonderfully engineered at Denver Sluice and Salters Lode, but which are subject to silting, serious silting problems. Now, we know that this system relies on us being able to discharge water at low tide and release it from this holding pen, which we call the fens. And so I'm just wanting to know, so bear that thought in mind. I remember having a discussion with a highly qualified person about, how long do you think we're going to be able to manage this system in order that we don't flood the fens completely? And because I was thinking about whether to stay here in retirement, and I was given an indication that actually 10 years is fine, but 20 years might be questionable. So I just want to ask you, what is your plan for management at Denver Sluice and the silting that is going on there, which prevents the gates being opened to allow the release of water for the entire duration of the low tide in the wash? And secondly, is it your view that because we're also strangely and contradictorily, we are subject to both flooding, but also a lack of water during summer. And so are there plans afoot to, obviously we have a plan for a reservoir at Chatteris, to store water which can be used for potable water in due course. But how are we managing, how is the Environment Agency managing the problem of silting at Salters Lode and Denver Sluice, but also the long-term water levels in this area? That's just a nice little question for after coffee.
Okay, Environment Agency, yeah.
Okay, at 4 minutes to 8, I will try and do this justice, and Phil might also have some stuff to chip in. It is a real problem, and it's a sustainability issue for this part of the world in terms of the changes that we're seeing around the increasing sea levels. That brings in more water in the tides, brings in more silt, and just in terms of some of the things my teams are seeing, so my navigation team, historically we may have had to undertake desilting operations at Denver to maintain navigation, once a year. That may now be as much as 3 or 4 times a year, and those operations can be as much as between £200,000 and £500,000 in order to complete. And so it's starting to become an operation which we're struggling to afford. That's to maintain navigation. In terms of being able to maintain a flow through Denver Sluice to discharge during the low tide, we changed our operation in this area about, I would say 15 years ago, to prioritise discharge through Denver to maintain a flow. And we've seen that being quite effective. It does depend on having the water to do it. So with the incredibly wet winter that we suffered last year, it has actually created more favourable levels in the biggest area of concern, which is actually 10 kilometres downstream of Denver at Stowbridge. So talking to Dan Pollard, who is our superintendent at Denver, he's saying he's actually seen much better passage in those areas than we have done previously. But this is all the current situation. I think what you're asking about is, what is the long-term view here? We will have some difficult decisions to make collectively, and this is more than an Environment Agency issue. When I say we, it's multiple partners, all of the other interests. We are currently progressing a project called the FENS 2100, which is a major review of the FENS. It's covering broader than just the Cambridgeshire FENS. It also picks up the Lincolnshire FENS because the landscapes are connected and have similar issues. We have a number of partners around the table, including the NFU, internal drainage boards, obviously all of our sort of other risk management authority partners, and we are looking to build the investment case for the future of the FENS, recognising that this landscape was designed hundreds of years ago, and in that time the climate around us has changed, and we need to consider what the future of this landscape is. So that work is ongoing at the moment. We're looking to produce some outputs in terms of the investment case around 2026, with some interim outputs in 2025. It is a big piece of work because of the complexity and size of the landscape. So that's the kind of strategic work that we are doing to look forward to the future. Some of the early indications around the climate risk assessment indicates that, you know, there will be some challenges coming into sort of the 2040s if we're looking at a, you know, 2 to 3 degree increase in temperatures. So some decisions that we need to make, you know, within the next sort of 5 to 10 years, that, you know, that will be significant for this landscape. We have also recently briefed the Floods Minister about the Fens, who's taken a real interest in understanding sustainability for this part of the world. So, you know, we are also at the same time trying to escalate the issue within government, because ultimately sustainability for Fens actually has a national implication when it comes to things like food security. So we are trying to tackle the issue from a number of perspectives, but also make sure that we have it recognised. You know, some of the solutions may not be local or regional solutions, you know, and may require some wider national support.
Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you very much, Ms Mairead. And the other thing which I asked was the how the planning for water sufficiency is going as well, the Fens Reservoir.
Environment Agency.
So yes, the Fens Reservoir, which obviously Anglian Water colleagues will be able to provide more information on in terms of timescales, is a crucial piece of infrastructure that we need in this region that will enable sort of, you know, the sort of current growth that's planned in this part of the world to progress, alongside the sort of Grafham water to Granular Canal. So there's the strategic resource options that are currently underway to improve water availability for this region. At Denver itself, we obviously run the Ely to Essex transfer scheme, which again is a piece of strategic infrastructure that ensures water supply across the whole of East Anglia. And when we start looking at the future of a site like Denver, we aren't just thinking about flood risk. So a site like Denver has major water resources implications, it has major flood risk implications, it has major navigation implications. And all of those factors need to be considered in terms of what is the need, what do we need Denver to deliver for us in the future, is the kind of water resource aspects of Denver, because there are climate change implications for whether or not the Ely to Essex transfer is able to operate in, you know, 20, 30, 40 years' time, particularly in those drier months. Would we actually be able to get any flow through Denver at all? So all of those things are in consideration in terms of how we move forward in the future. We know that the strategic resource options that are planned for now give the region some stability in terms of water resources once they're in place. But, you know, further growth that's planned on top of what's currently in train will need further thought around where the water supply will come from.
Thank you. Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions, one which would kind of follow on from that. I wondered whether the people here would like to update us with the discussions that they're having with the Water Sustainability Group in response to the sort of Cambridge 2050 project.
Does Environment Agency want to take that one? Yeah.
I think you're referring to the Water Scarcity Group.
Water Scarcity Group, sorry.
Okay, yeah. So the Water Scarcity Group is a collection of sort of key authorities and different partners that are interested in water security for enabling growth in Cambridge. To be very clear, that the remit of that group is not to do with Cambridge 2050. The remit of that group is to enable current growth planned in the system. That there is a longer term remit, but the current focus is until the Grafham Water to Granular Canal option, its strategic resource option is in place, which is planned for 2032. What are the different ways in which we need to manage water supply, water demand, to enable growth in the interim? So that's the sort of primary focus of the group. There is an awful lot of work underway within that group through numerous partners, including the Environment Agency, including MHCLG, and my colleagues here from the shared planning services as well. We are, I would say, there's really good commitment from partners, so we're making good progress in terms of developing the various options. So I'm working with Cambridge Water on having an approved and published water resource management plan, also looking at things like retrofitting it and water credits. All of these things take a lot of time in terms of understanding how they're going to work and their development, but there's commitment, there's funding, the partners around the table, and you know, I feel positive that we will come to a good solution that will enable development to progress, but also meet some of our more immediate water scarcity concerns.
Just to add as well, we're part of that as well, Councillor. So our head of demand strategy, Dr. Jeff Darch, who's basically written our water resources management plan, he sits on the water scarcity group, and he tells us about, you mentioned the reservoirs, a key part of that strategic option. Time-wise on that, just to give you a bit of an update, so obviously it's applied by about the mid-2030s, 2036, maybe towards the end of 2030s. So these are big strategic infrastructure projects that take a long time to go through planning and approvals, but we're cracking on with that because we realise that's needed. The other big SRO strategic resource option is our pipeline. So we're building a big pipeline from the north of our region that's going to skirt parts of Cambridgeshire down towards Essex. That's due to be finished in the next 18 months as well, 2 years. Another big pipeline, longer than the M1 motorway. Enormous infrastructure investment. So water is running out, without doubt in the east of England. I think it sort of harks back to a bit of the previous question about investment in the industry. As Matt alluded to, a lot of money was spent and maybe not seen. A lot of money was spent in the 90s, particularly about water resources back then, which is why Anglian Water, one of the most driest parts of the country, if not the driest part of the country, and with the water resource challenge, we haven't had water restrictions here. We've invested a lot of money in water resources, both in supply and demand over those decades, reducing our leakage to record lows, encouraging our customers not to use as much of the stuff we sell them, which I think is always quite funny when we say that. But our customers are really good at saving water. They've been talked about for years and years. Smart metering, another big thing, we're highly meters as a company. So a lot of that money and that investment over the years went on water infrastructure to guarantee supplies, because we knew back then how crucial it was to keep the taps flowing. Things have moved on, the environment's changed, and now it's on the water resources, water recycling side in terms of supplying funds for environmental protection. As Matt says, environmental laws have changed and the climate's changed around us, which means we've got to cope with flooding. So just a bit of a summary of what that investment was about.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. So I have a very different question this time, which is about phosphates in rivers. Where do you monitor for phosphates? We've seen the sort of storm drain map, but whereabouts do you monitor for phosphates? What work do you do in our area to reduce phosphate runoff? And do you target your work on phosphates to do with the sort of volume of water that's in an area, or do you target sort of habitats or sites of special sort of scientific interest? Thank you.
Anglian Water? Yeah.
So we've got a big scheme on P removal, call it P, phosphate removal, as part of our Water Industry National Environment Programme, aka WINEP. We're on a mission to build a number of wetlands across our region, and a substantial amount planned for the next 5 years. The primary funding driver for those is phosphate reduction and removal. So that's kind of what our strategy is in terms of monitoring.
So just to build on that, at the Environment Agency, we've got 36 locations in South Cambridgeshire, where we do phosphate monitoring across the Ivelry, Granter, Bedford Ouse, Bournebrook and River Cam. I have a map which I think we can provide. It might even be online. There is a water hub, again, a link which provides all of the data from that phosphate monitoring. So you can see, what the sort of outcome and results are there, if that's helpful. So we can just provide that after the meeting.
Thank you, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. My last questions are actually to do with the business plan with AMP8. The first thing I wanted to ask about that was back actually to the storm drain overflows. So in AMP8 it mentions that you wish to achieve a 17% reduction in discharges from storm overflows over the next 5 years. Do you think that that's a pace that would meet the expectations of your customers?
So I would say that whether or not it meets the expectations of our customers, I would guess probably not. But I would say it highlights the shared challenge of the scale of the challenge. When CSOs weren't really talked about prior to COVID, and people got out in their local area and realised what are these nasty things that are spilling out. But people's perception has changed. What I would say is there was a study done when the Environment Bill was first going through Parliament, and it was a study based on how much it would cost to replumb many of our towns and cities to get rid of storm overflows effectively, and the costs were absolutely astronomical. I mean, so I would say, a 17% is, given the investment we've got, is actually, pretty reasonable. Does it go far enough as far as our customers are concerned? Probably not. Do you want to talk about infiltration stuff?
These are government targets. So there's a thing called the Storm Overflow Reduction Plan, which has been mandated by government on all water companies, and that's our target to get them down there. But we're going to try and go faster than that. We're trying to get some already. We've taken several offline in the last 5 years. That 1,500 is coming down all the time. We have to target investment to the worst spillers and put other mitigation in. So I think the infiltration point will help us to achieve that. So it's not just about replumbing cities and towns, but obviously finding out where that water is to try and stop that getting in. So, the pipe will still be there, but it just won't be in use because the water will be getting into the system. There are various ways of tackling it, but it is a mammoth task, and I think the figure that Matt's probably talking about, talking of hundreds of billions of pounds to do this stuff, and no one wants to. That's just not possible with the bills and everything else and the investment needed. So it's an iterative process. We target the most spillers first, prioritising on the impact of the environment, and we work through as best we can within the budgets and the resources we've got to do the best we can. So you're right. It might not look great to the customer, but the more communication, the more education, the more we show people around these sites, show them what we do and how these systems work, the better that we can get their sort of understanding improved and see what we've got in front of us and work together to try and remove that water.
Sorry, just super quickly. The root cause of CSO spills in wet weather is surface water and groundwater into the foul sewer system. Combined sewer overflow, sorry. The root cause is groundwater and surface water into the foul sewer system. It's the same root cause as flooding. So the good news is that by tackling storm overflow reductions, we're also tackling flooding and flood risk. So the two do go hand in hand. So by tackling one, we are doing the other, and that's a really important point. But by reducing storm overflows, we are also reducing people's risk of flooding.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman, did you have anything?
Thank you for that answer. You spoke about bills briefly when you were talking about the solution. On Tuesday, in The Guardian, an article was published stating that the credits ratings agency Moody's believe that the water body Water UK, the industry body of which Anglia Water is a member, are planning to appeal against Ofwat's decision to rein in how much they can increase customers' bills. So when I looked at the your AMP8, in there it talks about the price rise going up by 11 pence a day. Is that 11 pence a day are these planned increases in addition to that 11 pence a day? Or perhaps in another way of describing it, is your business plan balanced with or without this mooted price increase that Moody's are talking about, please?
That's our proposal. So obviously, the Water UK have taken the water industry as a whole. Our price increase projections are modest compared to other water companies. I mean, you can have a look. Some of them are eye watering, and some other water companies in the UK, what they're proposing for the next 5 years. Ours is around about between 15 and to 18%, I think, over the 5 years. So that's our ambition. That's our target for our investment. If Water UK as a whole think the industry isn't getting enough investment from the determinations they're called from Ofwat, that's what they're saying on that. But each water company has their own level of investment increase that we're asking for. As I say, ours comparable to others is fairly low. In fact, our bills have been pretty low compared to water companies across the board for many years. Because of various reasons. But I think Water UK stance is their stance as our member body. You're right, but that's for the whole of the industry, and that's because some companies are looking at high double-digit increases in bill increases over the 5 years, which is has to be explained and justified in their terms. But as Anglian Water, ours are more modest.
What I would just say as well is on the chance of appeal, that's simply Water UK and its members saying that we don't think the amount that Ofwat is saying you can raise your bills by is enough, is what the public expect, isn't enough to give the standard of protection that people are wanting, the environmental pollution that people clearly are passionate about. So it's Water UK actually saying that what Ofwat are giving water companies is not enough to deliver what the public expect the water companies to actually do. And going to your point, Councillor Sanford, you said before about people be willing to pay a little bit more to see less floodings and less storm overflows. That's exactly what Water UK is saying.
And it's what our customers are telling us as well. That's what our business plan is written with the customer's mind. So we do thousands of consultations with our customers, asking them what they want to see from their water company, and they tell us exactly what Matt's explaining. People are willing to pay a bit more because it brings this investment and this protection for the environment and a better service. Ofwat might think differently, which is where the differences apply. So.
Okay, Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. One last question about financial penalties. So in your annual accounts, it said that you had an ODI penalty of 37.6 million. There was news broadcast fairly recently. On the 8th of October, I think it was Sky News reported that there was a penalty of 38.1 million. Are they two separate fines? Is that the same thing but just slightly? Yeah, I did think the figures were quite close together. That fine, does that restrict your ability to put in place the improvements that people are hoping for in terms of environmental protection? Will that fine be effectively passed on to customers? What's the sort of business impact of that fine, please?
Okay, yeah. So as we said earlier, we're open to scrutiny and prosecution and fines for poor performance, and our pollution performance hasn't been good enough, which is hands up, and that's where we are. We've got a 2-star rating for our environmental performance last year, which meant that levied that £38 million fine or rebate, if you like. So that's 1 year. So that isn't going to affect the investment for the next 5 years. That's next year's bill. This £38 million is going to come off. So in effect, the bill rises that would have happened as part of the 5-year cycle we're in now will not go up as much as we probably wanted them to, because that rebate will be applied to those bills for the customers next year. So in effect, the bills won't go up as much as they would have done because we're taking account of that £38 million. But no, it won't affect the investment in the next 5 years. That's a different period that starts from April next year.
I mean, if I can, the press haven't done a great job of actually explaining how the ODI system works and what it is. So what it is, it's saying in your business plan for PR19, for AMP7, you wanted to spend X amount and you were going to invest that in reducing floodings, for example. What we're saying is your ODIs, you've hit, we're not going into numbers, whatever amount of floodings, and therefore you've actually hit more floodings than you wanted. So the money that we gave you to invest in that, you've clearly not hit your performance, so we're going to take that back. So it's not really a fine as such as say a slap on wrist. It's the way it works. It's saying you were spending this money to hit this target. You've not hit this target, so therefore we're taking that money back because you've not hit that target. So it's not a fine. It's more of a refund in a way that it's not a refund to customers, but bills can't go up. So if you looked at United Utilities, who have hit what we call reward ODIs, where off what I've said, you can actually charge customers more because you have hit your targets. So that's the difference. Is bills would have gone up more had we not had the ODI targets to bring them back.
So to be clear, that would have been money that would have been spent on infrastructure or mitigation that is now not being spent on that because it's been taken back. Yeah. So it has a detrimental effect to customers and ratepayers. Yeah.
Well, no, because we have obligations to meet our regular, so we still have to deliver. So that money will have to be found from somewhere else.
Yeah. So when you haven't met those, the money is then found from somewhere else, but that is still a net decrease in what you can spend on infrastructure or.
So the whole system works on reward versus penalty.
Yeah.
So to answer your point, we're not going to ask customers to refund that money. That would have to come from another source, i.e. shareholders or another source of funding. That's not going to be recouped back from customers. The idea is there to incentivise water companies to outperform, but in terms of flooding and spillage, the Storm Babette and Storm Hank basically ruined a lot of our targets. In the summary, that's what's done it.
Does the fine directly come off shareholders?
Yeah, in the past, yes, they've covered it. But I mean, we're yet to see what the plan was this year. But yeah, that's what's happened.
Because that's what people would expect.
Yeah. No, it won't affect customers' bills at all. Other than
I just want to clarify that
should be.
It's
No. We can't. We'd never do that.
For the public that are watching. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. So to come a bit, it won't affect people's bills. Will it affect the planned work that's needed to improve infrastructure?
So a good way to look at this is if you look at what United Utilities, a prime example, have been allowed to charge customers a little bit more and invest a little bit more because they've essentially got a proven track record of getting money on their business plan and doing what they said they would do with it and delivering the targets. So they're given more money to deliver that work. So we still have firm performance commitments to hit for AMP8. We remain more committed than ever to hit those performance commitments, and the ODI system of reward versus penalty is still going to be there in AMP8. So we can't underperform in order to absorb that loss if that's what's being suggested. The incentive is always to outperform, so you get in that reward area where some of the water companies are now.
Councillor Lehman.
So who does bear the penalty?
Well, I think our shareholders, our owners, have to front it up. I think it's absolutely categorically doesn't go on to customers. In fact, the customer bills will be affected, but the other way around, they won't go as much as we wanted them to go up. So it's an idiosyncrasy of the water industry that's how it works. But no, it won't affect customers' bills negatively.
Very, very briefly.
Very briefly.
Very briefly.
My understanding was the wording of the penalty ensured that penalty would not affect customers, and it had to be absorbed by the company internally, and that's why it has to be.
And I think that's what's been alluded to
by
here,
shareholders.
been made clear. Thank you. Councillor Lehman, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those. I'm just going to be very brief because I think we've covered a lot. There was just 2 points I was going to pick up on very briefly. The first is the smaller pumps located in villages. A lot of the emails I get is almost around sort of pump anxiety, almost from, I see a lot of this in my day job with my prostate patients, but it's very similar in that a lot of those residents are emailing me before there is a problem or a flood, because they're very anxious before a period of high rainfall that their garden is going to flood or they're going to have the manhole cover. But it's quite noticeable that it's the same houses that are suffering this anxiety, and they always tend to be around those pumps. So just very briefly, is there anything that we can do to relieve that pump anxiety for those residents adjacent to those pumps. And I know that will be costly, and I know that there's not an easy fix to that, and we've already talked about the water runoff and how we might mitigate against that, so I didn't really want to cover that again. But just in those pump locations, is there anything that can be done?
Yeah, so I'd first say that anything that gets passed in like a certain area, so for this area, anything in terms of letters or contact comes to me. So it's me and my senior team that respond to the letters via potentially public affairs as well. So we are definitely seeing a big increase this year, and as well as potentially any issues if there are there. It's about I'm going to have issues, and that was something I don't think's been seen a lot before. The only reassurance I can give you is that in terms of those areas, I have a list of those areas in terms of that we are concerned about because of the infiltration. In terms as pumps and in terms of the network as what it is, it's constantly monitored, and if it's, as long as it's operating as designed, which is what the teams will go out to do. That's what your team goes.
Yeah.
At last. Just like I say something. It is something that's probably handled better locally as well. So if the residents do have concerns, it's worth contacting into the local operations manager.
Yeah.
And for example, then we can concentrate on that particular station. Sometimes it's the pumps are fine and it is doing exactly what they're meant to do.
Yeah.
And it's just a volume walking through it.
Yeah, and in fairness to that point, I've met with Anglian Water on site in, for example, Teversham. I've met with them, Fulbourn. And actually they would say that the pump is sort of functioning as it should be. If we got a really unexpected rainfall, it would probably fail. That then causes a load of pump anxiety for those residents adjacent to the pump, and it's that I think's hard to I'd like to see more reassurance for those residents to say that actually their house isn't going to flood.
Yeah, I mean, if it's that well known, and you sort of can put plans in place, like we can have a tankering plan already in place if we know that we've got the weather coming. But like I say, if it's brought to our attention, I mean, there is a service plan. Pump stations are all under a service plan.
Yeah.
But like I say, that local sort of conversation where we can pinpoint the pumps, lift them, do a quick check before.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, can I just?
Yeah.
So Lucy mentioned earlier our control centre in Lincoln. Every single asset we've got is telemetered. So if it fails, it triggers an alarm straight off into Lincoln to say it's failed. The other point is, and I'll just mention this very, very quickly, some people tell me in my 20 years of service, why don't you just stick a bigger pump in there? Bigger pump means a bigger pipe, which means a bigger sewage works, which means a greater discharge into the water course, which means a bigger water course taper flow. There's a whole chain of events you have to think about. I'll go back to my earlier point, we need to get the surface water out the foul sewer, and if we can do that, we solve all these problems.
Yeah, okay. And then my second point was one on, obviously we are the planning authority, and one of you touched on earlier that you don't have control over some of the conditions that were placed. If you were elected councillors tomorrow, what conditions would you really like to see that maybe we're not doing enough of now put onto planning applications?
So this goes back to my point A about making sure that sustainable drainage solutions are mandatory on developments. That's not always the case now. On ones more than 10 where Anglian Water are consulted, we will ask the local authority to add a condition like an agreed wastewater or surface water drainage strategy, but not all local authorities do that. And we understand why that's not always done. There's always an appeal case at the end of this that developers can always go to. The other point I would say is to encourage developers to work more closely with Anglian Water, because when we do talk to developers, we do have quite a lot of success in looking at on development attenuation, off development attenuation, but that takes time to do, and that's why we need those conditions in place to give us that time.
Okay, Lovely.
One more thing to add is about on the clean water side is to encourage developers through the planning application process to build sustainable homes for water efficiency as well. So get that per capita consumption point down. I think your local plan was the best place to do that. And we are statutory consultees on local plans, so we can help and advise and consult on those.
Lovely. Okay, so I think that is all the, sorry, yeah, coming on that, yeah.
Just on that question, and it's not an Anglian Water related answer, but around sort of planning a condition that when it comes to flood risk, we often find that flood risk will be mitigated where we raise concerns by raising the threshold of the property. But the thing, even though it is a consideration, the thing that seems to get left behind is that safe access and egress. And that's where we're finding a lot of the issues and the sorts of flood events that we're seeing at the moment. So I think if I was to have that wish of being able to sort of absolutely make sure we've got that pinned down in the planning process, ensuring safe access and egress during flood events and making sure that's, you know, absolutely robust would be my ask.
Thank you. Can I just bring Stephen Kelly in very quickly? Stephen, do you think we are taking those things into account that have just been highlighted in planning applications on the whole?
Certainly, I think water is something that your local planning authority is acutely conscious of as an issue, both in terms of treatment and in terms of consumption. And the flood risk issues that have been explored are matters that surface consistently and frequently in the planning application process. So we certainly do a lot of work with the Environment Agency, with the lead local flood authority around that, and with Anglian Water in terms of trying to explore how those concerns that are palpable in our communities can be kind of resolved as far as possible. People will be aware that we have tried consistently to impose tougher water consumption standards than the national planning guidance provides for, and in fact have been central, I think, along with the Environment Agency and water companies in the recent ministerial statement encouraging local planning authorities to set tougher standards on water consumption. So I can't comment on individual cases around means of escape and so on, means of access in circumstances of building in flood zone areas, but it's certainly something that I know that the EA and their teams give my team advice on, and we generally tend to have regard to. The few cases, detailed cases I get involved with, certainly we've been asking questions and my officers have been exploring some of those emergency egress issues.
Thank you.
As well.
Lovely, thank you. Let's bring you back in. So what I propose is that we, given that is all the questions dealt with, that we move on to just a brief discussion around some of the recommendations, and we can revisit these in future meetings. So it's not that we have to address them all, and I know Ian has very diligently tried to note down as we've been going along. Before we do that, would you like a break? Is that the consensus? Just a short, yeah, we'll have a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and aim to have the next section of the meeting as quickly as we can to go over those recommendations. Lovely. Anna? Anna, sorry, yeah, we're going to restart the meeting. Lovely, lovely, thank you. Lovely, thank you for all staying with us. I'm sorry it's been a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I think that was useful. So I think what we'll do now is look at some of the recommendations. So there will be other people with recommendations, but I'll do the first two that I think have come out of that, and then other people can chip in. The first one was around a recommendation about how the agencies work together and with us in the event of a flood or an emergency incident as to who is going to provide toilets, sandbags, emergency equipment, because that is clearly still not clear at the moment. So the recommendation would be that we meet to discuss responsibility, and if no responsibility can be sought, that there's a plan in place so we're not messing around in the event of an emergency incident. So do people feel that's a reasonable... Yes, Councillor Bradley?
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to clarify. As I understood it, they said if a flood incident had been declared, the responsibility came to the district council as the lead goal command person. They didn't say that, but I think that's what happened. Whereas if it hadn't been declared as an emergency, then no one had responsibility. I think that's what they were saying.
And it's not declared if it doesn't flood a house.
If it doesn't flood a house, it's not declared.
Okay,
or
so
if it doesn't flood
if a
sufficient
road
houses.
floods, like you were talking, one of you
I
were
was,
talking, so in that event, you know, who is responsible for that?
Nobody.
For that
But what I was saying, the reason I was saying that is because I think that's a national directive. It's not, it may be something that we have no power to influence.
But they seem to think there should be a plan in place for when that happens so that we know what's going to happen. So I think we should meet with the recommendation is for a meeting with them to decipher what action occurs in the event of an emergency that they don't deem to be an emergency, if you like. But
if not sufficient houses are. But what I was concerned about was that I think they were simply reporting that that was a case in legislation, and that they couldn't change it because if houses aren't being flooded.
I agree.
But they were saying it ought to include access and egress, didn't they?
Yeah, but they did also say that because of what they'd seen in Vendray, they were reviewing that process.
Yeah, so the recommendation is for a meeting with them to decipher how that process works. And so I think that's a reasonable recommendation out of this. The second recommendation I was going to put on the table was in relation to Councillor Dr. James Hobro around communication and what more we could do to better communication. Do you want to add anything?
No, that one's fine.
Councillor James Hobro, do you?
So they're definitely making progress in this area. The MAG is a big step forward.
Agreed. Yeah. So how do we build on that?
Yes. So we might be able to work with. We might be able to help put the parish councils in touch with the Anglian water representatives. I mean, as representatives, we have a good relationship with parish councils, and we can. I mean, a lot of. I think of a large part of what we do as being helping to put the right people in touch with one another, so that then next time they can talk to each other directly. And I think, in a way, this is one of those situations. So I'd certainly like to open up. I'd like us to try and explore how we can help the parish councils to work more closely with. It's going to be with all the agencies, because this ties in with the whole situation that Matt, I think, was highlighting, ultimately it's all about the groundwater being too high, isn't it? And that's something that has quite complex solutions that might involve riparian ownership, it might involve district-owned ditches, it might involve county-owned culverts. And the parish councils are in a unique position to work on that.
Yeah.
But they also need to be in contact with Anglian Water to understand what's going on from the point of view of the foul water system, and you know where the issues are that affect the parish. So yeah, I think a discussion around opening up lines of communication.
Agreed, and keeping
it's quite broad.
As simple as that, probably. Yeah. Councillor Bradley.
Yeah, I don't think, realistically, none of us have the ability to influence groundwater. That's going to happen regardless, because it depends on the underlying geology. So we're not going to, but the matter is the communication.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the third thing that he did offer, Matt Moore offered, was to arrange a project for education around surface water not being fed into foul drains, didn't he? And he talked about maybe projects in schools and re-education, but I don't know how he planned to re-educate and quite who he planned to re-educate. But they also did talk about they were trying to draw together their own misconnection leaflet. In other words, where rainwater goods are misconnected into the foul. Yeah. But I did wonder quite how, if there's any way that we might help to arrange such a South Cambs project that he referred to.
Work with them to better that. Yeah. Okay. Pop your mic on, Councillor. Sorry.
Is that something that perhaps ought to be built into planning as well? Because there are certain, I read something in the Times last week, I can't remember what it was now, where they'd actually retrospectively built soakaways and opened up flower beds and taken away paving to actually increase the absorption of groundwater.
So he talked about they were doing a programme of redirecting surface water runoff, rainwater, in schools. Do you remember? He said.
Yeah.
So that's a project they're doing in schools, but I think.
So we've already got to work with that. Are you suggesting that we have a further recommendation to work with the planning committee?
I think it would be good to actually be overtly saying that it's one of the major considerations with a new development that management of groundwater.
And how do you envisage that looking? Would that be a meeting with Stephen Kelly and the lead officer?
Yeah, I think so.
Following today's meeting to discuss what's been discussed with them.
Because there are huge developments going on. I'm not sure that.
Yeah. So we'll have that as a recommendation that a representative from this committee, that might be Councillor Earl, reports back to Stephen Kelly and the lead member regarding these issues. Does that seem reasonable, Councillor Earl? Is that, yeah? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Chair. I hate to shatter people's illusions, but when a major planning application comes before the planning committee, Anglian Water's contribution is typically one line of boilerplate says Anglian Water has a statutory responsibility for removing sewage from this site. No more detail. You can correct me if that's wrong, Anna. That's actually the wording. Where we need to insert it is in the local plan, and I think this was mentioned in the discussion rather than individual planning applications.
So would you work with Councillor Earl to feed that back into planning, not just the committee but the local plan as well?
Yeah, we obviously. I think we need to get Toomey involved because she's got half guardian of the local plan. But yes,
just so that's fed back into that process.
Absolutely, yes.
Councillor Ellington.
I've had many discussions with Lee Ilham about the
Just your mic. See, yeah.
I've had discussions with Lee Hillam about the fact that he rarely gets opportunity to address the knock-on effects of extra water going down the particular ditches or drains that it's being put into it. Yes. Yes, the developer will have put in his plans that it only meets the criteria of flowing at X, Y, and Z, but it's still, and that's the criteria, it's still additional water that's going down his drains that he then has to keep clear, and the outflow is particularly in my patch, has subsequent effect on the amount of water that has to be pumped over into the river because we're lower than the river levels. So that there's knock-on effect that he is not really being consulted on, which I think is worth mentioning.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Drew.
I think it would be worth developing something in relation to the line of questioning that Councillor Bradnam had in relation to the culvert in Milton, I believe, where you talked, Councillor Bradnam, about the fact that the residents and the landowner, whatever, had cleared large parts of the culvert, so it was completely clear, and that the district council had removed the green waste and everything that was dug out, but the county council hadn't then cooperated in terms of cleaning out the two sections of culvert that were underneath the road. Obviously, since we spend the vast majority of our time talking about stuff to do with Anglian Water, our recommendations relate to them. But I was very much struck by the fact that you were talking about what seemed to be a really good example of community cooperation and people taking responsibility for their local area. And then they had come up against one of the organisations who hadn't done their bit. Now, if you think about lots of stuff we talked about in terms of Anglian Water, like I talked about not adopting the sewer, or we talked about not measuring properly the outflow from the storm drains. And I think the point that Councillor Ellington made to the Environment Agency about the gates and such like, and we kind of quite rightly challenged them in relation to that. But what you were talking about there struck me as a very good example of where maybe we should seek to get people to work together better. So I'm not entirely sure what a recommendation is, but it may well be something related to the clearing of culverts and making sure that finding some way to try to bring together all of those with responsibilities to work together better when action is being taken by a community.
But one of the issues, as they said about the gates, is that funding was refused and they haven't got any other form of funding to do the job. Mm-hmm. And the fact that those gates have been sitting in their yard for the last 5 years makes no difference.
Forgive me, Councillor Ellington, that was, the funding had been refused to the Environment Agency.
Yeah, but it's them that would do it.
No, well, but the point was that, as I understand, the Environment Agency put in a bid for funding for various works this year. And whatever they...
Let's try and focus on recommendations.
I'm coming to it, Councillor Cohn. But they actually only got a third of it. So that's a problem for the Environment Agency, and they said they were going to concentrate on the St Ives bit as well. But in this case, the point that Councillor Drew is highlighting, and I appreciate you doing so, is that the people who were here today were the flood and drainage folk, but the people who had not cleared the culvert were county highways. And it's county highways who hadn't cooperated. And in fact, I say that because Hilary Tandy and Brian Heffernan came to a meeting in Milton. And I was doing a presentation to explain the geography,
I think we get
approached it,
Chair.
what we realised is that parishes are not empowered to raise money to do work on flood risk or drainage because it is a highways responsibility when it's
Okay, so I would pull it back to the recommendation that we seek to make, which I think is a recommendation that the recommendation that we seek to support communities who need to get engagement from those responsible for the clearing of sections of drains that are beyond what the community themselves can do. Well, drains, whatever. That's where I would go with that. Okay, thank you.
The final, sorry, I was just going to add one more. I will let you come in next, I promise. So the other one's, we had a conversation, I think again it was Anna or Councillor Lehman that had mentioned about the reporting system and the fact that it's really difficult online to navigate that, and people just don't understand it and they report in the wrong places and messages don't get to the right people. And they talked about like a one-stop shop. So I thought a recommendation from this committee, because there was no timescales given on that, and when she was pushed on that, there didn't seem to be, you know, it was going to be as soon as possible, but I think we should push for timescales on that being delivered and state as a district council how important that is to our residents. Councillor Peter Stamford.
Thank you, Chair. Can we capture the point that Stephen raised about Anglian Water requiring gold-plated sewers before they actually adopt them? Because I've come across this in Papworth as well, the Summersfield estate, which eight years down the roads still haven't been adopted, and county are pointing their fingers at Anglian Water.
Yeah. They did.
Yeah, but we need to capture it to make sure it doesn't fall off the radar.
Okay, so we could have a specific recommendation, which is that district councillors are we saying district councillors in Camborne will meet with Anglian Water and the Highways Authority for the adoption of sewers and roads? But we could make it more about new towns, because then it sounds a bit better, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So therefore, are we seeking to, that district council would ensure that, I don't know, I can't think of words anymore.
How about the proactive discussions are enabled between Anglian Water and developers regarding adoption of sewers?
Yeah, that's it. Great.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's also a distinction to be made between adoption of all sewers and roads and particularly... Sorry. I actually meant roads because it's the sewers and then the roads. Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. I've eaten it all already. Sorry. There's the process of adopting sewers and then the roads in any part of a new town is difficult and important, but it takes particular significance when it's outside civic infrastructure. So if it's outside a school or a library or a GP or some sort of civic infrastructure, I think that should be prioritised most of all because of the high footfall and the general use of people walking up and down there.
That's reasonable.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, very reasonable. Councillor Paul Bear-Park.
Yep, just quickly, going right back to the start of the meeting, there seemed to be a lot of promotion. Everyone was interested in promoting the idea of flood action groups, and we didn't go into that in any more detail. I was just wondering if we could get some more information on how those work, what they, what the benefit of them is, and because I do wonder, I realised there was a flood action group effectively in Milton, but it didn't succeed in that example. But there may be. I remember when before the recent floods, there was some advice came out from officers about ensuring preparation in advance of the flooding rather than trying to act once it happened. And flood action groups could be very useful in ensuring that the communities are prepared in advance.
Yeah. Agreed. So I think we could probably link those 2 points around communication and the action groups into one recommendation, which we'll do afterwards. Councillor Ellington, yeah.
Certainly Lee Gillam has been key in helping to establish a flood action group in Finn Drayton and another one in Swansea.
Yeah.
And there are not sandbags, the blow-up bags available.
So include him in that conversation. Agreed. Councillor Bradnam.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
The other point I was going to make is that the reason for trying to set up flood action groups is that they are entitled to apply for monies from residents for work against, to ensure flood resilience, whereas parish councils are not. So there is this difficulty that parish councils are not empowered to do that, whereas flood action groups are.
Yeah, so build on that. Councillor Lehman, did you have something else you wanted to?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to point out that I know that there's a very active flood action group in St Neots, and it's probably worth having a look at the sorts of activities that they do as well. I know they're very active. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Peter Stanford.
You could probably add Ellsworth Flood Group to the mix. They've got a very enthusiastic techie guy who...
I think we can sort of... Yeah. We'll liaise with the wall.
They've got other things. They actually got something that sends out text to all the residents when the alarm goes off on the overspill.
County councillors are, of course, very familiar with the flood action groups because they're an arm of the county council.
So I think that communication recommendation will build in all of those points. Any other recommendations?
I'm not sure whether it's a recommendation, but is there no way we can communicate up as far as central government and our MPs about monitoring how much money and how much investment is put into our water infrastructure? Because, as has been pointed out quite reasonably, these guys have had the remit for 35 years and there's been chronic underinvestment. If you look at what's happening in Europe, look at countries like Switzerland, which had really major problems with sewage outfall, and that's been stopped because they built vast underground storage facilities for surface water. But we've done nothing, and these companies are allowed to say, we don't have the money, it's too expensive.
So the recommendation is to work more closely with MPs
Absolutely.
On feeding back residents' concerns.
Residents' concerns generally about the way in which our water infrastructure is run.
So I think that's reasonable. I think residents can do that individually. I think councillors can also approach their MP. Do you think we need a representative from this committee to feed back to the MP?
It needs to be done.
A letter or one of us representing
because
that?
It's a joined up thing. We know that it's a Liberal Democrat policy to be concerned about our water infrastructure.
I think that the principle of what you're saying, reporting back to the MP from what we've discussed today and our residents' concerns from this committee, either via letter or us picking a representative is reasonable. Are people agreed on that? Yeah? Thank you. Yeah, agreed, yeah. MPs, yeah. Yeah.
Actually, 3 MPs.
MPs, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to try and draw us to a close. Is there anything else that people wanted to say on this item? I think we've got a large amount of recommendations to take from that, and I think it was worthwhile going through those points. I apologise that it has been a long meeting, and that is my fault as chair. I really wanted to get a lot of those points discussed, but I accept it's been a long meeting. Very quickly, Councillor Bradnam.
Well, you asked if there were any other points that had been missed, and one of them was the Environment Agency obviously raised a concern very delicately, given that the head of the Director of Planning was there, about buildings, dwellings being built and in order to mitigate the risk, they raise the floor level, but they don't, as Councillor Ellington pointed out, enable access and egress.
Yeah.
And so it was a call to arms for our planning committee and our planners to ensure that we don't enable developments that are feasible purely on the basis that
I agree with you, and I think that would feed into Councillor Earle's recommendation around feeding those issues from what we've heard today back to the lead member of planning and Stephen Kelly. So I think that is reasonable, and Councillor will have a look at that. Yeah, with us. Yeah. Lovely. Okay, so we will move on to the next agenda item, which is the work programme. I don't intend to say anything about the work programme other than that I will send you an email to explain that we will be swapping one of the items off the work programme and replacing it with something different, but I will email you all. If you've got any questions, you can get that to Councillor Drew, myself or Ian. So if there's nothing else, we'll see you at the next meeting. Thank you all for attending a very long meeting.